This is Atomic Shinobi and today I'm going to narrate second and final part of What If Naruto's future changed with just a few words. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Not wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Naruto ate a bit of something. He was unsure of its current identity. Initially, it appeared to be a large salamander, but now it resembled a lump of blackened charcoal on a stick. It tasted decent enough, especially considering that Naruto used to drink extra, chunky milk. Therefore, anything above that was respectable. As he began to throw away his food, Akito grumbled, "This thing is straight up charcoal. Meat isn't supposed to be crunchy." But Naruto caught him. Akito glared at Hana and asked sarcastically, "How do you suck this much as cooking? Or, better yet, why in the hell did you offer when you suck this much?" Supported by the three Haimaru brothers, the three dogs who were her friends, Hana squinted and snarled. "Shut it, Akito," she snarled. She was no longer in need of embarrassment. She constantly attempted to disprove her mother's assertion that she lacked culinary talent. For this reason, she seized every opportunity to cook. On the fifth day of their 7-day journey, it was her first opportunity. Before then, everyone had made their own little breakfast. Lunch was usually something you could eat on the run, and dinner was something you made yourself. But for a change of pace, they decided to eat the salamanders after stumbling upon them while out for a stroll. She retorted, "Naruto seems to like them," as her pride repaired itself. When Akito turned to look at Naruto, he almost started laughing. Unable to decide which of his salamander sticks he liked best, the largely blonde boy was taking bites from them alternately. Despite his intense focus on the sticks, he maintained his composure. Although he was completely tame, he ate like a wild animal. He appeared to be a famished animal that had not eaten in weeks, even though there was no mess or food flying everywhere. It was an absolutely breathtaking sight, but it was insufficient to stop Akito from making fun of them both. With his mouth full of food, Naruto interrupted, "That's because he doesn't have any taste. Buds. How else could he eat ramen all the time? Don't you dare insult ramen." His scowl was met by Akito. Levi complained, "Uzumaki-san, Akito-san. It is not wise to raise your voices in unknown territories," while he nibbled on the salamander that had been burned out of courtesy. The impact was instantaneous. Naruto's eyes ceased to be angry and he appeared sheepish. But Akito was a different matter. "I'll talk as loud as I want, bug boy," he exclaimed, underscoring his point with an irate swig from his canteen. Levi's eyebrow arched. If there was one thing that irritated him, it was remarks like that. He was making fun of his clan's methods and skills. The majority of Akito's insults seemed to center on this, as if he knew it. When Akito noticed the twitch, he grinned. Being one of the few who could elicit a response from an Aburame made him feel somewhat honored. They were so stoic that they almost looked like robots. With his head cocked slightly to the left in curiosity, Naruto asked, "Talking about your bugs, I heard that you had a bunch of kinds." The majority of Aburame only had Kakaichu, according to his readings and Kakashi's teachings. This was due to the bugs' capacity for rapid maturation and further evolution. The majority stayed with them because they were a very adaptable species. Levi nodded after a proud expression crossed his concealed face. "You are correct, Uzumaki-san. I have a total of 3 different species," he replied. In dozens of generations, he was the only Aburame to achieve this. An accomplishment not seen since the time of the Wearing clans. "Really? What kinds?" asked Naruto, who appeared utterly enthralled. On the other hand, Mizaki appeared clueless because he had no idea where Levi's bugs were hiding, while the rest of the group appeared mildly repulsed. He held up a finger and Naruto noticed a tiny insect standing on top of it. "I have my Kakaichu, the most common insect among my clan," he said. Levi went on to say, "The second species is the hornet," but Naruto interrupted. "Why do you have hornets if you already have Kakaichu? My father was one of the ones who stole a queen and I was given the option to attempt to merge the hornets with my pre-existing hive of Kakaichu when I was a child," Levi explained, adjusting his glasses before responding. "During the Third Shinobi War, my clan stole several queen hornets from a clan from Iwa that also specialized in insect ninjutsu," he said, taking a deep breath before continuing. Since hornets are a highly evasive insect species and have a tendency to eradicate any other insects within their territory, this was extremely dangerous. If I hadn't merged them with my hive, they would have eliminated my Kakaichu, leaving me with nothing. Levi finished and took a swig from his canteen, feeling a little out of breath from his lengthy, winded speech. "However, I merged them with the help of sugar water, small insects, soothing music to relax them, and remaining still and calm for several days undisturbed." Since they had never witnessed an Aburame speak so much at once, everyone appeared somewhat amazed. "Whoa!" exclaimed Naruto. "What about your third species? What about them?" with a tone of excitement. I am not at liberty to say. Why? It is a secret among my clan, Levi said, a little let down, as he adjusted his glasses. Few people were interested in his clan, and he was paying Naruto back without providing him with any explanations. But Naruto gave a nod. Although he was a little let down, Kakashi.ni explained to him the importance of keeping one's abilities a secret. Levi nodded in response to Naruto's question. Oh. Well, can I see one of the hornets then? From Levi's cuff, a hornet the size of his finger crept silently onto his hand. The two Jonin grimaced, believing that it was disgusting that he had those inside of him. Mizaki fainted. Hana eked loudly as she retreated, and Akito leapt away. Whoa, it's so big. Naruto leaned forward and cried out. Akito screamed in disgust. That's so gross, bug boy. You have that shit inside of you? Knowing that Levi had a bunch of finger-sized hornets was just too much for him to handle, even though he could tolerate the fact that he had bugs in him. It was the most repulsive thing he had ever seen. Levi's eyes narrowed, but it was difficult to see because they were obscured by his glasses. He was too preoccupied with restraining the urge to order his hornet to sting Akito to reply verbally. He didn't do it only because he didn't want his hornet to perish. Suzuki said solemnly, "That was very rude of you, Akito. Apologize," and her eyes narrowed. Akito rolled his eyes until a burst of murderous intent struck him. Astonished that his sensei would actually use killing intent, he tensed before muttering, "S's. Sorry." As soon as he said the word, the killing intent disappeared, and he wiped away the perspiration that was collecting on his forehead and exhaled a little in relief. Although it was with the powerful substance, it wasn't even close to being his first experience with the intent to kill. She emphasized her point by letting her eyes narrow into a glare. "Those are Levi's abilities you're making fun of. Do not do that again, Akito," she warned. She felt proud when she didn't receive a snarky comment. Perhaps Akito just needed to occasionally be strong-handed. Since genin teams were meant to be like family, she was initially hesitant to do so because she didn't want to cause friction with Akito. She didn't know how to reprimand or discipline him without driving in that wedge because neither she nor Akito had a mother. To make things worse, Akito was not accustomed to receiving reprimands because he was raised without parents. As a result, he responded to them with sarcasm and some rather offensive language. She did, however, feel less afraid after observing Kakashi and Naruto's interactions and receiving some advice from her coworkers. She merely hoped that Akito would eventually express gratitude to her. "Yeah, it was," Hana said, embarrassment flashing through her for her first reaction. "I'll never know how Naruto's such a little angel and you're a complete ass," she muttered to herself, but Akito heard. With irate eyes, he spat, "I'll never understand how you're such a bitch." Hana squinted, but Suzuki intervened once more before she could respond. She gave a firm command, "Enough, both of you," and once more sent out a tiny amount of deadly intent to get them to stop. While Akito tsked before getting up and declaring he was going to bed, Hana leaned back and relaxed, though she continued to wear a glare. Suzuki experienced a twinge of regret. Had she been too severe? Since Hana initiated the altercation, she ought to express regret to him later. However, would doing so compromise her authority? She did not want him to despise her for reigning in his misbehavior. Suzuki's worries were put to rest when Kakashi gave her a subtly encouraging thumbs up. It's good to know that she hadn't been overly strict. As he studied the boy, Levi asked flatly, "Inuzuka-san has raised a very good point. Why does Uzumaki-san act so well? Behaved considering the environment he was raised in? He had been troubled by it for a long time." As awful as it may sound, the majority of orphans were troublemakers. Although Akito was an extreme example, many of them behaved similarly, albeit to a much lesser degree. Kakashi squinted, unsure whether Levi was referring to Naruto's treatment by the village or to the fact that he was an orphan in general. In any case, it was a good question. Naruto saw that everyone was watching him, waiting for a response. His face flushed. He knew the answer already, he was just too ashamed to say it. "I read a book that said people like people with manners, so I thought if I had really good manners then people would," he stated, trailing off with a sad gleam in his eye after he fidgeted under their stares. When they heard that, everyone felt sorry for them, but before they could respond, Naruto stood up and declared that he was also going to sleep. After being reminded of how he was treated in the village, he lost the desire to speak. After a few minutes of silence during which only the fire and crickets could be heard, Hana said, "Maybe we shouldn't have asked?" And everyone nodded in agreement before going to bed, with the exception of Kakashi, who offered to take first watch. On the 6th day of their journey, it was midday, and there was a lot of silence. Even Naruto was avoiding contact with everyone, and Akito appeared to be in a worse mood than usual despite the group's frequent arguments. In any case, there wasn't much space for conversation with the formation. Levi and Suzuki guarded the left, while Hana, her nin, dogs, and Naruto guarded the right. While reading his favorite book, Kakashi took the back seat, while Akito occupied the center. Mizaki was deeply perplexed by the dense silence. What transpired while he was away? Seeing that hideous hornet emerge from the boy's jacket was the last thing he recalled. A crime lord should have a larger stomach, but that was because he always delegated the grunt work to others. Whether it meant murdering someone's family or tickling them until they pleaded for forgiveness, he just told them to finish the task. The group hiked up the steep slope and through the forest. They were in a hilly area that would soon give way to real mountains. It was only a 4-day journey at shinobi speed to reach the mountain range where Iwa was, and Kakashi was beginning to feel a little anxious. Despite a few changes, Naruto was still clearly Minato's son. They simply shared too many similarities for him to be someone else's child, and everyone would have recognized Naruto's appearance if it hadn't been announced. People began to notice Naruto's striking resemblance to the 4th Hokage a few years after his birth and the sealing of the Kyuubi. There was a resemblance even though his face was mostly composed of baby fat. The 3rd Hokage declared that Naruto's appearance was due to the sealing in order to ensure that no one connected the dots and started spreading the word. They readily accepted the excuse because the majority of shinobi and all civilians were ignorant of the sealing arts. Some even condemned the boy on the basis of it, claiming that the fox was making fun of their deceased hero by sullying his face. The fact that the minor adjustments made him look more like a fox didn't help either. He didn't even need to mention the whiskers because his red tips were almost the same color as the Kyuubi. They could not rely on that announcement now that they were out of Konoha. It would be disastrous for Naruto if someone with half a brain and a picture of Minato were to make the connection. He called Naruto over after deciding that something needed to be done. "Oi, Naruto," he said, gesturing for Naruto to follow him. Naruto, a little bewildered, did so. He reached into his pocket, the same pocket that held his valuables, and took out a mask that was exactly like the one he wore. He had it as a spare. He offered the dark blue mask to Naruto, who accepted it with an even more perplexed expression. "Wear this," he said. Confused, he glanced up at his Ni-san. He always found it cool that Kakashi wore a mask, similar to the superheroes he occasionally read about in the manga, but he couldn't understand why he was suddenly offering him one. There had to be a valid reason, but he wasn't going to say no. "There's sulfur deposits in these hills and it stinks something fierce. This will help dull the smell," Kakashi said, lying with a disarming smile after noticing the bewildered expression. Before putting it on, Naruto nodded, believing his Ni-san even though he didn't entirely buy the excuse. He made some changes, then looked up to get Kakashi's approval, and he received a nod. Similar to his own, the mask obscured everything beneath his nose, revealing only his amethyst purple and cerulean blue eyes and his red and blonde hair. As long as he wore the mask, Kakashi reasoned, it would be sufficient to confuse anyone. Before returning to his station, Naruto grinned under his mask and said, "Thanks Kakashi.ni," only to be taken aback by Hana's adoration for him. The others just looked on in amusement at the two. "Oh, you're so adorable. Now, give me one of your brother's strange eye smiles." Hana stopped in the middle of her sentence, her eyes gagging, and she covered her nose with her hands. Her voice sounded nasal as she screamed, "What is that smell?" Everyone was greatly confused as her nin dogs whined along with her. Akito said, "What are you talking about? I don't smell shit." But his tone carried a hint of worry. Despite his dislike for Hana, he knew she wouldn't lose her mind over nothing. With a worried expression on his face, Naruto asked, "I don't smell anything either. Is it one of those sulfur deposits that Ni-san was talking about?" As he watched Hana retch, Levi looked worried and said, "Perhaps the reason only Inuzuka-san can smell it is because of her more highly developed sense of smell?" Kakashi took a deep breath and narrowed his eye as he directed chakra toward his nose, greatly enhancing it. He completely understood Hana's reaction because he smelled exactly what she was smelling. Despite his intimate relationship with this smell, he never grew accustomed to it. The smell of burnt hair and charred flesh. His gaze met Suzuki's, and he nodded subtly, to which she replied. Suzuki used a little genjutsu to make herself more vulnerable. "Mizaki-san, with your permission, I would like to investigate the source of the smell Hana is experiencing. It could be dangerous however, so if you don't feel comfortable taking the risk we will continue on our way," Suzuki said. The jolly man's cheeks flushed as Suzuki's beauty suddenly increased. She was already stunning, but now she appeared to be the most beautiful angel in heaven, grinning at him. He nodded stupidly, and whatever fear he might have had disappeared without a trace. If she asked him to, he would walk into the depths of hell. The genin gave her a determined look as Suzuki nodded and said, "Thank you for taking this risk, Mizaki-san." You were incredibly brave for doing so," before turning to her team. "Levi, Hana, Akito. Stick to your formation and protect Mizaki-san at all costs. We might run into trouble, but it will be nothing to panic over. Remember your training and keep a level head and you'll pull through whatever we might run into," she said. Knowing that this was probably part of the Jonin's plan, Akito nodded. He gave Naruto a worried look because he knew that when they arrived at the smell, they would encounter bandits and a death-defying battle would break out. Although he was unable to see his face, he could see the child's eyes glowed with determination. He sighed slightly. Although he had not liked the boy at first, Akito was beginning to like the brat. Since Akito thought he was fucking awesome and he recognized a lot of himself in Naruto, he assumed Naruto was at least somewhat awesome. He was worried about Naruto, though it's possible that his affection for the boy stemmed from some deep-seated reason or instinct. Akito was startled out of his reverie when he turned his head back and saw Hana grinning knowingly at him. "Don't look at me like that when you're that green. I ain't washing vomit out of my clothes mud breath," Akito muttered as he pressed forward, his face flushed and his eyes rolled unconvincingly. After a few minutes, they reached the smell's origin. The stench intensified as they got closer, to the point where Hana appeared completely sick and Naruto was gagging through his mask. A cave was the source of the stench. With chakra enhanced vision, you couldn't see the end of it because it was so big and extended so far back. Most likely, it was a system of tunnels. So beware. Slight gore. The ungodly stench, however, was not coming from the cave. The corpses were splayed both inside and outside of it. Their crisp, blackened skin made Naruto think of the salamander he had just eaten. Whole bodies were reduced to charcoal and carbon clumps that had darkened. In the cave's mouth, bodies were stacked on top of one another, but there was no reason for this. No, they were scrambling over their friends' bodies before they perished, frantically attempting to avoid whatever fate had befallen them. The team came to the conclusion that the network of tunnels was as full of corpses as the entrance because black smoke poured from the bodies, releasing the stench, and more smoke poured from the cave's mouth. As Naruto stared at the scene, he felt sick to his stomach. He wanted to turn away and forget about this memory, but he was unable to do so. His gaze was fixed on the scene in front of him. His eyes would simply find a new detail to be captivated by each time he tried. Some were still reaching out, attempting to crawl away from the slaughter, as evidenced by the way their bodies were laid. He attempted to turn his head away, but his eyes met theirs, or what was left of Tema, and their vacant sockets berated him, demanding to know why he wasn't there to assist them, why he hadn't been there to prevent this disaster. Final slight gore. He was unable to respond to their requests. All he could do was stare while Suzuki tried to wake Mizaki and he heard Hana throw up in a nearby bush. He hardly noticed when Kakashi came up behind him and gave him a gentle pat on the head while they looked over the scene together. As he looked at the scene with a neutral expression, Kakashi thought, well, that explains the lack of bandits. For the past few days, he and Suzuki had been wondering why they hadn't been attacked. It seemed that someone had decided to do some spring cleaning on their own. But that's what Kakashi was most concerned about. Since Konoha hadn't gone on a mission to get rid of the bandits, he knew it had to be another village, and Iwa was the closest one. He inspected the bodies alongside Naruto, but unlike Naruto's unskilled mind, he was gaining an understanding of the shinobi level that killed the bandits rather than feeling guilty. It was probably the work of new murderers, he concluded, as evidenced by the damage to the surrounding cave and forest. The fire that killed the bandits was extremely hot, flashing burned them, and consumed more chakra. It was probably a genin who had just begun killing or was getting their first kill and wasn't able to completely control their emotions. There was also a lot of what appeared to be obsidian, he noted. Therefore, it is likely that one of the bandit slayers used lava. With that deduction, Kakashi had been spot on. Deidara gestured to his cheek and muttered, "Hey, Kuro-chan, you got little." His voice was devoid of its characteristic boldness and confidence. A muted tone had taken its place. Kuretsuchi felt something wet when she reached up to her cheek. Looking down, she saw it was blood. She started frantically rubbing away any traces of the substance, but she knew it was useless, and her eyes widened. She would be covered from head to toe once more in a couple of hours. 3 days had passed since her first killa, or, perhaps more accurately, her first dozen. Nearly 50 of them were gathered around fires, counting their loot and playing with the women they had captured, when she and her team came upon an encampment. She had been ill. These animals were considered human beings. No, they were merely beasts disguised as humans. When Kuretsuchi's father ordered the bandits to be killed, she was almost relieved. The word, almost, was crucial. The fight had been brief. The bandits had no chance against Akatsuchi's earth jutsu, Deidara's explosions, and her lava. After the battle, her rage disappeared, only to be replaced by a hollow feeling and a deep pit of regret. A single jutsu and dozens of dead were too simple. A man's life ended with a single toss. It haunted her because taking a life was too simple and easy. She would feel better if there had been a fight. She wouldn't experience this heartbreaking guilt if there was a challenge and the bandits had a chance of killing her. She was aware that the bandits were evil people, and despite witnessing their actions, she was still filled with guilt. Even after her father sat them down and gave them advice on how to cope with their guilt, she was correct in stating that the bandits were animals and that they indirectly saved far more lives than they had stolen. Maybe she wouldn't have felt as awful as she did if she had had time to heal her hurting heart. But there was no time for her. It was just one slaughter after another, rinse, repeat, wash. Deidara was screaming, Kuro-chan, 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 as he took Kuretsuchi's hand to stop her from rubbing her face. "You got it, he said with a half-hearted smile as the younger looked up at him with wide pink eyes and a red face. With her eyes a million miles away, the girl sat down close to the campfire and simply nodded stupidly. In an attempt to distract himself and his comrade from the massacres, the blonde sighed as he sat down as well. However, a boy's scoffing interrupted him. "Looks like someone can't handle being a shinobi," remarked a boy with black hair and dark eyes. He belonged to one of the more seasoned groups. Although Deidara's eye narrowed, he decided not to answer. At such a comment, he would normally lose it, but he wasn't feeling like himself. Deidara's fist struck him in the mouth, interrupting the teenager. Maybe she should just give up being a shinobi if she's just gonna cry about everything. Iwa doesn't need a bunch of cry-baby brats in their ranks. Even if she is the Tsuchikage's granddaughter. The boy went on. Maybe he would feel better after a good fight. "Wanna die, prick?" the black-haired boy asked, reaching for a kunai as he flew back but landed on his feet and glared bloody murder at the blonde. "I just thought you might want to catch a peek at some real art, Deidara said, reaching back and grabbing his clay. His eyes gleamed with madness. Before the black-haired boy could throw his kunai, Kitsuchi appeared out of nowhere and grabbed the boy's arm. "Enough," the man said, looking down at the boy and observing how quickly any resistance vanished from the boy's eyes. Kitsuchi wouldn't have resisted even if he hadn't been the Tsuchikage's son. Even though he looked like a monkey, the man was notoriously tough and would not tolerate any kind of disobedience. After turning to face Deidara, who was raising his hands in a gesture of surrender, Kitsuchi looked at his daughter. The hardened man's heart broke when he saw the girl's unfocused gaze, clearly replaying the events of the previous few days in her head. He sighed slightly before approaching and lifting her. Normally, she would have screamed and kicked at such a gesture, but Kuretsuchi made no sound at all. After a minute or two of walking away from the group, he threw his daughter in a heap on the ground. Kuretsuchi gave a little grunt and struck the floor before getting to her feet, giving her father a curious glance. She jumped into her father's chest and started crying when he nodded. Unable to come up with anything to comfort his daughter, Kitsuchi sighed again. "We only have a few more days of slaughtering bandits," he might say. Even so, it was only a question of time until they received another mission of this kind. His father told him to man up and swallow his tears after he was killed for the first time, but he was at a loss for words. He did just that, but he was unable to bring himself to say the same thing to his daughter. She might feel a little better if he just let her cry for a while. Akito whispered, "Damn. That is one hell of a drop," as he peered over the edge of the path they were following. The fact that the escort group was now strolling along the side of a mountain indicated that they were nearly there. They would reach the capital of the land of tea after passing this little mountain. It was frightening how steep the drop was. There was no chance of getting lucky and landing on a ledge or anything because it was entirely vertical. Akito felt lightheaded at the thought of death, which was inevitable. Hana's nin. Dogs gave a few nods of agreement as she said, "If it's such a drop, then why are you standing at the edge? Haven't you seen the movies? You stand on the edge, the cliff breaks and people die." Akito simply whistled softly before taking a step back, preferring not to act out the scenes from the films. Akito looked at his teammates' faces as he went back to his place. He was concerned about them, though he would never admit it. Hours passed before Hana finally calmed down enough for Kakashi to explain how to make her sense of smell less strong. Levi was always quiet, but he seems unduly unaffected by what they witnessed. Therefore, Akito had no idea how Bug Boy felt. The largest shift was Naruto, who was as quiet as a mouse. Because of the mask, he was unable to see the boy's face, but he could tell that he was wearing a dejected expression. Akito sighed slightly. He was also somewhat unaffected, but not by the same amount. He lived in the red light district, so he had seen death before, but this was the first time he had seen a corpse like that. Out of the corner of Naruto's eye, He saw Akito look at him. Naruto was starting to get confused because the older boy seemed to do it every other minute. Was the mask to blame? He didn't think Akito was concerned about him, but he wouldn't have to. Even though it was cruel. Kakashi.ni told him that those bandits deserved their fate. They were thieves, rapists, and murderers who did no good and wreaked havoc. Even though it seemed wrong, Naruto accepted that since, at a young age when he was still learning the ins and outs of the world, he had spent the previous year learning that some people deserved to die and that killing them was a good deed. Even though he still had no desire to take a life, he was starting to accept that he couldn't avoid doing so and that maybe one life could save hundreds. That was not, however, what he was thinking about now. He was considering the parallels between shinobi and bandits. They did the same things, didn't they? Wasn't shinobi as much of a murderer, thief, liar, and more than bandits? If so, did they not deserve that as well? Did their use of ninjutsu constitute the only distinction between them? He was considering his chosen career and no, his chosen life. In order for everyone to accept that he was Uzumaki Naruto and not the Biju he held, he desired to become a ninja and the Hokage. Now, though, he was considering the long, violent, and bumpy road that lay ahead of him in order to take the hat. Was he capable? Was it really possible for him to do such things in order to gain Hokage? Wouldn't carrying out those actions simply demonstrate to everyone that he was, in fact, a monster? He had no answers to any of the questions that were racing through his head. Those questions could only be answered by time and experience. But Naruto had no idea that he would soon gain experience much sooner than he had anticipated. Everyone heard the scream coming from the same mountain they were on because they were all lost in their thoughts. They almost missed it because of the strong winds, and it was muffled, no, strangled. Suzuki's eyes opened, and she glanced at Kakashi once more. Kakashi nodded and closed his book. She requested permission to investigate using the same genjutsu as before, and the cheerful man promptly granted it. The group hurried to the source after Kakashi threw the man over his shoulder, believing it to be a band of bandits murdering a hapless group of traitors. They were correct, in a sense. Although their fundamentals were the same, their application was incorrect. Although a band of bandits was present, they were not responsible for the murders. When they arrived, the road was wide enough for 5 wagons to ride shoulder to shoulder without risk of falling, and bodies were scattered across it. Because there were occasionally 5 wagons going down, it was made that way. 6 children and 2 adults were the only people standing in the road, and the Konoha ninja happened to notice them right away. In an instant, both sides were on high alert and were taken aback by the sight of ninja, though Kakashi was much less so. As each team produced a different number of weapons, the Jonin on either side leapt in front of their genin teams, all but 2 of them glaring at one another. "Rakan," said Kakashi, lifting his headband to reveal a Sharingan eye. Kitsuchi said back, "Hitaki," while cracking his knuckles. In the Third Shinobi War, the two had encountered each other multiple times. During the war, Rakan had led a guerrilla group. They were experts at destroying bridges and blowing up supply wagons, but their main specialty was creating hell. Rakan was a B-rank ninja who was on the verge of being an A rank. He had no last name. He had a reputation for being able to handle iron's texture. Only he and his son possessed the new Kekkei Genkei that surfaced with him. It would quickly become a clan to be feared after gaining a few more members. As a disarming eye smile replaced his normal one, Kakashi said, "I don't suppose you could just let us pass?" Rakan gave the offer some thought. There was a chance that war would start if they fought now and people died. It would have been a different matter entirely if their objective had been to kill their client. However, it would be blatantly aggressive to kill them now. However, dead men didn't tell stories. What are we supposed to do? But his colleague answered on his behalf before he could even reply. "Like hell we will. Do you really think we'd let that Mons student walk by us without a fight?" he shouted. The tall, lime green-haired man was named Iru. For the same reason that everyone in Iwa detested the Yellow Flash, he did too. He would sell his soul to the devil just to spit his eye because the man had caused him to lose his entire family. Compared to his comrade, he was far more ordinary. A typical career without Kekkei Genkei would have resulted in an endless chunin, but he was fortunate to become Jonin. With a smile on his face, Kakashi said, "Nah, I didn't think so, but can you blame a guy for trying? Regardless of your point of view, this was a bad situation. They had no idea whether Rakan had reinforcements, and they were outnumbered. He didn't look at their genin. They all appeared prepared for battle and rather gory given that some of them were covered in blood. Running wasn't an option, but the odds were against them. Mizaki was not going to sacrifice anyone to serve as a decoy, and he would slow them down. They were forced to battle and simply hope for the best. While both sides calculated how best to attack or defend, a light breeze blew through as they waited for the other to initiate contact. "Tree hugger," said the previously mentioned black-haired boy, Sui, to Akito. Akito shot back, his eyes narrowing. "For brains," he said. Sui attempted to get Akito to initiate contact by asking, "What's it like coming from such a pansy village?" With a sly smile, Akito said, "Fine, what's it like to be Konoha's bitch? After all, we bent you pussies over the counter and made you ours in the past the wars." A master of the art of getting under someone's skin was being agitated by this idiot. "What did you say, prick?" Sui said, her eyes narrowing. "You heard me. Konoha bent you over and we had our sweet way with you. Or maybe should I say the Yellow Flash did? After all, he slaughtered, what, a third of your forces in like 2.5 seconds?" Sui gave the brown-haired boy a murderous glare, his nostrils flaring. What a jerk he is. How dare he make fun of his village and the war dead? His black eyes glowed with anger as he roared, "Shut up or I'm gonna kick your ass, Band-Aid." He was enraged by insults to his village, if nothing else. No one was able to get away with insulting his house. The who and why didn't matter to him. It was those words that sparked the conflict. Rakan threw a powerful punch at Kakashi after shooting at him with remarkable speed for a man of his size. Kakashi anticipated this, though, and kicked the man's fist away before turning around and running down the mountain because of the Sharingan. Since their battle would alter the immediate terrain, he was putting distance between them and the genin. Rakan permitted Kakashi's actions despite being fully aware of them. It would be detrimental to everyone if the genin were killed in the battle. They played catch up for a full minute until they arrived at the foot of the mountain they were walking on, at which point both men skidded to a stop. They stared at each other in a little clearing, neither of them saying anything because they had nothing to say. They started fighting a moment later. Iru growled and began to follow Kakashi, but a smirking Suzuki interrupted him. She gave the man with the lime hair a seductive smirk and said, 2-on-1 seems a little unfair. How about playing with me, handsome? Naturally, she was lying. The man appeared to have been beaten with rocks as a child, but that didn't really matter. Kunoichi frequently used this strategy, and the justification was straightforward. Men were perverts. The strategy was successful for 100 reasons, including a sense of chivalry and the fact that less blood was flowing to the brain because it was going to their other head. The man flushed and then gave her a glare of anger, so it worked, as it always did. Iru growled, "Get out of the way. I need to," but was interrupted by a kunai slicing his cheek. It would have struck his neck, but he was able to avoid it at the last second. He drew his own kunai and scowled at the still smirking Suzuki, his eyes narrowing. "You better keep those eyes of yours on me. Otherwise you'll die too fast," she said with affection. Suzuki raised an eyebrow when her adversary simply tsked before he grabbed onto the cliffside. "You wanted a fight, bitch, but we're doing it in my element," he said, before leaping back a few more times. "I'll just kill you and take Hitaki's head afterwards," he said, before flashing a savage smile. Suzuki appeared dubious. She was hesitant because she would be leaving her team in a precarious situation and it was clear that her enemy was planning something. She had faith in her team and her own abilities, though. She was sure she could defeat her opponent quickly, and then she would help her genin if they needed it. "I wouldn't have it any other way, you a scum," she said, hardening her resolve before leaping onto the vertical wall. The genin kept staring at each other while the jonin instructors interacted. The fact that neither side had previously engaged in combat with enemy shinobi combined with the fact that they had not been ordered to do so. Naruto and Team 7 were tense, and Suzuki instructed them to protect Mizaki before she left. They were outnumbered, so that was much easier said than done. "It would be most wise to split them up between 3 of us while the last guards Mizaki-san in case one happens to slip by us," Levi said out loud, fixing his glasses as he considered the situation. It would be useless to conceal such a tactic. As her dogs growled alongside her, Hannah nodded and said, "I'll grab the brown-haired one and the blondie," grinning ferociously. Both of the unidentified ninjas agreed to work together on her, and they narrowed their eyes. Akito smiled as broadly as he gazed into angry eyes. "Well then, I'll get Blackie and Baldy," he said, referring to the adolescent with the shaved head next to him and the person he had been arguing with. "Then I shall take the remaining 2. Uzumaki-san. You shall protect Mizaki-san," Levi said, nodding in acknowledgement as insects started to fly out of his sleeves. Naruto repositioned his tanto and nodded. Knowing that he was excluded due to his age, he felt somewhat offended, but he knew better than to voice his displeasure. When Suzuki and Kakashi were not available, Levi took charge of the team. Without saying another word, the altercation started. Kitsuchi glanced bewilderedly at the mountain his fellows were climbing. He could see big pieces of debris falling off, but he was too far away to see anything specific. He was perplexed by this since the jutsu being used was far too advanced and they ought to have completed eliminating the bandits 10 minutes ago. This implied that either shinobi were engaged in combat with their fellows on that mountain or that there were one or two notable bandits. With his gaze fixed on the mountain, he said, "Kuretsuchi, Didera, Akatsuchi. Take a solider pill and get ready for a run. We're backing up our comrades." Rakan hit the ground after Kakashi sidestepped a powerful blow, causing a fist-sized crater to form along with a cloud of smoke. The big man's fist, which had been metallic gray, turned back to its natural white color as he stood. The man's Kekkei Genkai allowed him to completely transform into metal. Although Kakashi was unsure of the details, he was certain that at least 3 of his knuckles were broken, so it was likely a complete transformation. Before throwing a few kunai that bounced off the man's suddenly metallic skin and TSKED to himself, Kakashi rolled away. He had fought Rakan several times before, but he was struggling a little. Because of the way he fought and the limited number of ways to win, he was always difficult to deal with. Since he was composed of a harder material than rock, water, or wind could handle, most jutsu would not work on him. Kakashi used lighting jutsu because he was unable to create a fire jutsu hot enough to melt metal. Rakan could break out of even the best-ranked genjutsu, but genjutsu would be a solution. He simply didn't leave many openings for abuse. Rakan picked up a kunai and threw it back at the silver-haired man, grinning. "You should know better than to think that these puny things would work on me," he said confidently. As his mind started to process dozens of potential tactics, Kakashi easily avoided the kunai. The most obvious and practical solution would be to use a lighting jutsu. It would be the best method of winning because metal was a fantastic lightning conductor. Rakan would, however, have a number of countermeasures because his opponent was also aware of this. Even a lightning jutsu couldn't penetrate his thick rubber sandals, and it appeared that his clothing was no exception. Due to the man's Kekkei Genkai, taijutsu was not practiced. Even though Kakashi was proficient in taijutsu, he didn't think Tsunade of the Sannin could break his thick metal body. The trees that surrounded them made long range impractical, and since Rakan was a close-quarters fighter, he prevented Kakashi from getting farther than 5 feet away. Kakashi ducked beneath the elbow that followed another powerful blow. Though perhaps not rapidly, he was unquestionably losing ground. Rakan would eventually wear him down and come under his protection if things kept going the way they were. Rakan threw a left hook that Kakashi barely avoided, instead taking out a huge chunk of a tree. "Keep on dodging, you slippery snake. I'm gonna nail you sooner rather than later," Rakan yelled. It appears that Rakan shared Kakashi's thoughts. After being doused with splinters, the masked ninja TSKED and leapt back, kicking Rakan in the stomach to put some distance between them while he tried to think of a strategy. "Fire release. Grand fireball," he mentally recited before he exhaled a huge fireball that, as the name suggested, engulfed Rakan, buying himself some time. After just 5 seconds of the fireball, Kakashi stopped the jutsu and made several leaps back. Even though the Grand Fireball jutsu didn't cost much in terms of chakra, Kakashi was getting close to the halfway empty mark as a result. He had been using a jutsu to catch his breath for more than 10 minutes, and this was not the first time he had done so. But with each one, the chances of winning this battle were getting smaller. Before he hit E, he may have had 15 mid-level jutsu or 2 chidori. Rakan came out of the fire relatively unharmed, much to Kakashi's dismay, though he was not shocked. The majority of his clothing had burned off in the flames, and his entire body was covered in a metallic gray color. Some of the metal was even burning. "Did you really think that would work? I told you puny things like these wouldn't work on me," Rakan said with a smug smile as he brushed off flames that covered his forearm, making a loud scraping sound. In battle, Kakashi observed that almost all Iwa ninja he had ever encountered acted very cocky. And then he suddenly realized something else. He finally came up with a plan, smirking behind his mask, and he had just enough chakra to carry it out. 2 clones appeared beside him as he leapt backwards once more and created the seal for Naruto's preferred jutsu. He then created a dozen or so intangible clones and the ram seal. Rakan observed the shadow clones blending with the intangible clones and then scattering throughout the forest. In the end, he didn't care, but he raised an inquisitive eyebrow at Kakashi, wondering what the man was doing. His Kekkei Genkai rendered him virtually impervious to conventional attacks, so he was sure he could handle anything Kakashi threw at him. He could not even feel the blows unless someone was very strong. Kakashi retreated into the woods and breathed fire while flying through the hand signs for the Grand Fireball Jutsu once more. But this time, he only leapt back a few feet at a time, gradually moving farther into the forest. Rakan moaned in frustration as he transformed his flesh into a metal again. He was certain that what was left of his pants had been burned away, even though he couldn't feel it. He had no idea what Kakashi was attempting to accomplish because he was unable to sense anything when he transformed his body into metal, including the flames. It was a significant advantage of his skill. Seeing their best jutsu do nothing to him was one of the scariest things anyone could ever see. Rakan held his breath as he started to walk through the flames. Based on the flow, Kakashi was still ahead of him. For what felt like an eternity, but was actually closer to 2 minutes, he ran through the seemingly never-ending flames. His metal skin was not shielding him as well as it had. His whole body was now on fire, as if he were in an oven that was gradually getting hotter. He rushed forward, trying to eliminate the source of the flames after realizing that he had to get away from them to avoid becoming overheated. Steam lapped around Rakan's body as he exploded out of the flames, then stopped suddenly. Bewildered, he searched his surroundings for the reason behind his sudden immobility and discovered it. He was encased from head to toe in an intricate web of ninja wires. Rakan became aware of Kakashi's actions in that one moment. "Figured it out, did you?" he asked, his tone smirking in contrast to the sheen on his exposed skin and the sweat-soaked mask. Rakan tightened his jaw. "You used the flames to hide the fact that those clones of yours were setting up ninja wire. The fake clones were to throw me off. I thought you were sending for help or an ambush later," he said with a firm voice. He detested how easily he had fallen into the trap. "Yep, I had them make it just slack enough that you got tangled," Kakashi said, nodding, as he lightly tugged on the wires in his hand, making them tighten around Rakan. Rakan gave a frustrated hiss. The wires were too intricate for him to hope to untangle himself anytime soon, and he was unable to move sufficiently to muster the strength to break them. When Kakashi noticed that Rakan had realized he was lost, he gave him a quick smile and said, "It was a fun fight," before he flew through hand signals while holding onto the wires. Murder by electromagnetic means. As lightning struck his opponent through the wire, he mentally yelled. Rakan's brain was fried and he died as hundreds of thousands of volts passed through him. After verifying the fried man's death by checking his pulse with one of his clones, Kakashi sighed wearily and released the wires, causing Rakan's body to thud loudly to the ground. He put his hands on his knees and took deep breaths. He was worn out. Kakashi had hit empty and slightly below the Grand Fireball, the Sharingan, the Shadow Clones, electromagnetic murder, and all the other C-rank jutsu. He most likely lacked the chakra necessary to produce even one phony clone. But his battle was far from over. He still needed to support Suzuki and his adorable genin, even though they weren't actually his genin. He cracked his neck and popped a solider pill, waiting for it to take effect. He was correct that his battle was far from over because he had to dodge a flurry of shuriken just as he was about to run back up the mountain. He saw 4 people enter the clearing as he slid back, his hand in his pouch ready to return the favor. A blonde with a crazed expression in his eyes, a boy with a large nose and a plump face, a girl with pink eyes, and a man with the same build as Rakan. Although Kakashi was unsure of the identity of the children, he was certain of the man's identity. On his worst day, Kitsuchi, the Tsuchikage's son, was a formidable A-rank threat. Before turning to Kakashi, Kitsuchi appeared uninterested as he gazed at Rakan's body. "Did you do this?" he asked in a rough voice. Not wanting to waste words, Kakashi nodded curtly, and Kitsuchi turned to his students. He commanded, "You 3 go help out on the mountain." His comrades seemed to be up there, before his fists were covered in rocks. "I follow you up in a few minutes," he said, and his team ran away. "Suzuki, I'm going to be the one in need of assistance, so I hope you're about done up there." Suzuki gave her opponent a seductive wink as they engaged in kunai combat, making him flush before he jumped back. The fact that the technique was working on him did not surprise her. The man was extremely vulnerable to the tactic since he was just too unattractive to engage in any meaningful interactions with women. What was that lime green hair, and why was his face so scarred and out of proportion? She let herself drop a few feet and then reattached herself to the mountainside after shaking off the thought. She was beginning to feel anxious, but she was still unsure of her opponent's strategy and the reasons behind his selection of this terrain. She could remain horizontal for a few more hours if they continued to use taijutsu. She wouldn't last more than 20 minutes, though, if this escalated into a ninjutsu fight. Her opponent shouted out his technique, Earth Release. Rock Fist. As a child, sized fist shaped like a rock swung at her, seemingly in response to her worries. Water Release. Water Bullet. She yelled as she dodged the jutsu with a sideways handspring and then returned it with one of her own. Water was all she had, even though it wasn't the best jutsu against rock. She was drawn to both water and earth. Using them on an Iwa.Nin was a bad idea. You could argue that rock would work better. It was a nasty habit of theirs to turn your jutsu against you. Iru yelled, "Earth release, earth wall," and a rock dome appeared in front of him to shield him from the water. She took out a kunai, attached an explosive tag to it, and threw it after Suzuki Tsked. She put a 2-second fuse on it because she expected it to pierce the hard rock, but it failed. The mountain was rocked by a loud explosion, which made Suzuki dodge pieces of debris and hope her genin did the same below her. Her opponent was hidden by a dense cloud of smoke and dust. Since she didn't see a body fall with the debris, she was certain he wasn't dead and assumed he was using the smoke to conceal himself and plot his next move. Like I'd allow it, before saying, "Water release, water whip," and flying through hand signals once more, she thought. A thin stream of water came out of Suzuki's mouth, and she then abruptly swung her body to the side and sliced through the smoke. She was surprised that she encountered no opposition. Where is if he's not there? She began to ask herself, but was interrupted when two hands leapt out of the solid rock below her, causing her to jump up and start to fall. She looked behind her and realized that she was high enough to die if she didn't return to the cliff quickly, which made her heart race. She reached out and leaned forward, focusing chakra on her palm. She scraped the cliffside once, but it didn't attach. She tried again, but this time it worked, and she was able to latch onto the mountainside. Her problems were far from over, though. Iru shouted, "Earth release, rock dragon," while employing his most powerful jutsu. A massive mountain-made dragon materialized from the mountainside as he was finishing his sentence, and it sped toward Suzuki's crouching body. The woman's eyes widened as she flung herself sideways to avoid the dragon, but as the jutsu struck, a big rock cracked against Suzuki's skull and debris flew everywhere. She saw stars and blood poured down the right side of her lovely face. Maintaining her attachment to the mountainside required all of her focus. She became aware of her opponent's intentions at that precise moment. He intended to injure her head, making it more difficult to shape her chakra as a result of her concussion. She would be a sitting duck since she wouldn't be able to use jutsu if she didn't fall to her death. As she closed her right eye, she thought, "This is bad." Blood had gotten into it, and she didn't want to take the chance of rubbing it out with her hand and creating an opening. Ignoring her aching head, she bit her lip while trying to think of a plan. Her opponent smirked at her as she gingerly got back up on two legs, her legs trembling visibly. "Having trouble standing?" he asked confidently. Despite his slight exhaustion, he had enough chakra to defeat Kakashi. "What can I say? You're making me weak at the knees," Suzuki said, giving him a seductive smile. Iru blushed and his eyes flitted away, much to her amusement. "Ha! I still got it, despite being a bloody mess." She smirked as she considered this, then gave her opponent's response more thought. Her grin gradually changed from one of amusement to one of slyness. She steeled herself, drew a kunai, and ran at him. She wasn't as quick as she usually was, and a dark spot flickered across her field of vision, but she chose to ignore it. She won if this worked. After deflecting the stab with his own kunai, Iru delivered a punch that Suzuki ducked under. She grabbed Eru's red and brown vest as she rose again and slammed her lips together. Eru's mind went blank, and his eyes popped open in shock. Even though he wasn't a virgin, Suzuki was far more attractive than any of the women he had ever dated, and all of them had been paid for. He could tell it was phony even when he paid for pleasure. Their eyes were blank, all of their groans sounded so forced, and they would much rather be spending their time with someone more attractive. This straightforward kiss was entirely different. She was the one who started the kiss, and he could sense her passion. His instincts were telling him, somewhere in the back of his mind, that something wasn't right, that you don't go from attempting to kill each other to making out in 3 seconds. But all he could think about was how wonderfully soft her lips were against his. Suzuki groaned sensuously, urging Iru to join in, which he promptly did, his body responding instinctively and his mind still blank, placing his hands at her wide hips. Suzuki asked for permission to enter by licking his lower lip, and he promptly granted it. She then slid a kunai into his heart and her tongue into his mouth. For a moment, Iru stiffened as he withdrew and gazed down at the metal fragment sticking out of his chest. Then, with gentle care, he reached up and removed it to gaze at it in amazement. No longer molding chakra, he staggered back and started to fall. He looked disbelieving and had a betrayed expression in his eyes as he fell to the ground, where he died instantly. Suzuki spit out a small amount of blood and the taste of Iru. She was extremely fortunate that the strategy worked as well as it did, or else she would have perished. The majority of shinobi at that level became resistant to such strategies. Yes, she had been extremely fortunate. She was about to turn to face her genin when she noticed a big, flaming explosion close to the mountain's base. She muttered, "Kakashi," as her only open eye widened. and then she ran down the mountain and down the second steep slope, taking the shortcut. She missed Kitsuchi's Genin team interacting with Naruto because of this. Since Hana had more fighters than her opponent, including her nin dogs, the fight wasn't particularly tough and, in fact, she had the upper hand. Her only challenge was that, despite the road's great width, it was too narrow for her attacks to be completely effective. Since the rest of her team was engaged in combat nearby, she was unable to use her smoke bombs because she did not want the smoke to blow in their direction and make her comrades' battles a little more difficult. Since the road was so narrow that she could potentially fall off the mountain, she was unable to use her Suga or Getsuga. Surprisingly, when you quickly spun and jumped around at 100 miles per hour, your ability to perceive depth was completely destroyed. Perhaps if she had been able to use her signature techniques, she would have already won. But she was having difficulties because she was unable to. She appeared to have assembled a group of people whose skills greatly complemented one another's. One who was a defensive jutsu specialist. Such things as supportive jutsu and rock walls. She wasn't sure whether he had any tricks up his sleeve because she didn't witness him doing anything particularly offensive. He was difficult to work with because his partner was an offensive jutsu specialist. She was aware that none of the jutsu he knew were more advanced than C rank, but they became even more problematic when combined with his friends encouraging jutsu. This was becoming annoying. Hana dodged a rock fist, and her nin dogs did the same, and she growled back. The defensive jerk would always throw up an earth wall when she got too close, and the other jerk would then use jutsu to push her away. She just struggled to do what she knew she had to do to win. Dividing and conquering would be the simplest strategy to win this, but sadly, her opponent was also aware of that. Hana grabbed a smoke bomb from her pouch and weighed the benefits and drawbacks of throwing it. She caught a glimpse of Levi fighting a red-haired jerk out of the corner of her eye, but he appeared to be struggling. She might make her battle easier if she threw this, but she could also ruin Levi's plan or catch him off guard. She extracted her empty hand from the pouch while gritting her teeth. She would have to find another way to win this. She couldn't risk that. She gave the two smirking boys a fierce look. She became very irate when she was unable to hit anything. The first one began. "Bet your, I regret picking," went the second. They both concluded in perfect unison, frightening Hana. It was simply unsettling. She retorted, "Keep talking smack while you can. You'll be eating dirt before too long," as she was startled by their similar smiles. They resembled dolls, really. "We highly doubt." Duh. Hana roared, "Shut up and let me hit you," as she charged the two, snatching a kunai from her pouch and throwing it at the defensive one. As anticipated, the kunai bounced off innocuously and a rock wall formed. But that was precisely what she intended to do. The offensive one appeared a moment later, still making hand signals for some earth jutsu, but Hana triggered Plan C before he could even call out the name of his technique. The offensive one was forced to retreat behind the rock wall as the Haimaru brothers dispersed behind her and each threw a kunai. She came closer and closer than when she had charged in with no real plan. The offensive one reappeared and used his jutsu when she was nearly 10 feet away. Earth release. Piercing spear. He cried as a sharpened earth lance shot out of the rock wall and raced in Hana's direction. When the missile scraped her arm and rolled away, the Inuzuka's eyes widened and she ducked to the left, her back to the mountainside. As she tested her arm, she hissed, "It hurt like a bitch right now, but it would be okay with some treatment, though there would undoubtedly be a scar." As she held her injured arm, she thought, "Well, that didn't work." She glanced to her left and noticed the worried looks coming from the Haimaru brothers. To reassure them, she smiled at them. "Now that you're injured, you will be much easier to deal with," they concluded collectively. "God, that is really unsettling, but they're correct." As she tightened her grip on her wound to calm herself, she thought, "I need something to divert their attention because I'm a sitting duck right now." Something fell from the sky as though in response to her prayers, slamming loudly to the ground and sending a cloud of smoke skyward. After a few seconds, the smoke cloud dissipated, revealing a crater formed by whatever struck the ground. Then they discovered it was a corpse. The dolls exclaimed, "Sensei!" as their focus was abruptly diverted to their teacher, who was clearly dead. It was just what she was looking for. Hana yelled, "Suga!" as she transformed into a human drill and pointed at the two boys. Her cry drew their focus back to their adversary, but it was too late because Hana was too close to employ a jutsu. To the left and right, the two boys leapt to the side. Hana smiled when her nin dogs caught her off guard and targeted the defensive one, quickly overpowering his defenses and rendering him unconscious. She stopped using her jutsu, skidded to a stop, and grinned at the furious teenager. "A lot less confident without your buddy to back you up, ain't ya?" she said, her clan's trademark grin playing at her lips as she took a step forward and he took a step back. Anger filled the teen's eyes as he looked at his unconscious partner. "I'll kill you, you bitch!" he screamed as he quickly formed jutsu but was stopped by a flurry of shuriken and kunai. When he got back up, he felt a sharp blow to his temple, knocking him unconscious. He had once again leapt to the side to avoid the ninja weapons. Hana smiled as she glanced at her unconscious rivals. She was the first one finished and felt she performed fairly well. She turned to see Naruto, expecting to be showered with praise from the cute boy, but she was astonished by what she saw. Mizaki and Naruto had left. Levi used one hand to wipe the blood from his chin while holding his aching ribs. His high collar had been sliced open during the altercation, exposing his face and cracking his sunglasses. His body was slashed, the blood seeping through the heavy cloth. He thought about how bad his opponent's matchup had been. One of them employed genjutsu, which was ineffective because Abarames were immune to lower-level genjutsu because his insect's constant eating of his chakra changed its flow. Levi took a chance and assumed that he couldn't use the more advanced items. But he also employed kenjutsu, which worked wonders against him. Every Abarame's weakness, taijutsu, seemed to be a perfect fit for his other opponent, who had white hair. Even though he was skilled in the academy style, it was like facing a more powerful Aikido because he was swift and utterly unpredictable. Levi calmly fixed his glasses and straightened himself without making any noise. Not that his opponents weren't hurt. One had stung the redhead's eye, and they were covered in enraged red whelps. After learning the hard way how painful those stingers were, the two genin stepped back as hornets started to crawl out of his sleeves. Levi didn't express it, but he was relieved because he had much less space for each species because he shared his body with 3 different species. His other insects were still in the green, but he was starting to get close to the danger zone when it came to hornets. But it would be a long time before his Kakaichu consumed enough chakra to have an impact. Naturally, he already had a few on them, but he didn't want to use his 3rd species unless absolutely necessary because doing so might make it clear. They served as his secret weapon. As he considered his Kakaichu, Levi hummed to himself. Maybe giving up stealth wouldn't take too long. The partner would be the only issue, and his plans would be derailed if he knew any water jutsu. Even worse, he needed to find a different method to defeat the other one because he only had enough chakra to trap one of them. But soon a plan came together, and he began the 2 of them. He ordered his Kakaichu to swarm outside of him after gathering as much chakra as he could, and they did as he said. From him sprang a dense veil of buzzing insects that hung sinisterly overhead. The 2 genin retreated further, suddenly feeling exhausted by Levi's plans. The redhead screamed as soon as he realized where the insects were going and started swinging his sword wildly in an attempt to cut the insect cloud apart. Secret technique. Insect sphere, he said softly as he raised his arms and his insects converged on him. His efforts were in vain. The redhead was soon covered by Levi's insects, and the buzzing noise drowned out his cries of sheer terror. After taking in the scene in disbelief, his comrade promptly started making hand signals. Fire release. Fire. He paused suddenly as he gave his next move careful thought. He had a good chance of roasting his friend in the bugs if he used a fire jutsu now. He TSKED before focusing on a worn-out Levi and directing his remaining jutsu towards him. The jutsu should stop if he killed the caster. Levi was hit by a fireball and flung himself aside to avoid being burned. He apparently made a mistake. He had intended on Hana. A girl's voice interrupted his thoughts as she yelled, "Suga!" before colliding with his opponent's stomach and sending him sideways. But the teenager bounced over the mountainside because Hana miscalculated and applied too much force to the technique. When Hana saw the teenager bounce off the cliff side and vanish from view, her mouth fell open, and she took a deep breath. She knew she had just killed someone without having to glance over her shoulder. When Levi put a soothing hand on her shoulder, her rapid, shallow breathing at the first signs of hyperventilation was stopped. For some strange reason, she felt comforted as she gazed into his black-tinted glasses. "We don't have time to fret over our first kills. Why? Because Aikido.san is losing," he stated. The redhead he had swarmed had either suffocated or died from shock. "We'll help him out, but Naruto and Mizaki are missing. Naruto's scent leads further along the path, but I saw you were in a tight spot before I checked it out," Hana said, tensing up her nerves, and Levi nodded. He remarked, "Uzumaki.san is a capable shinobi. He can take care of himself," as the 2 rushed to Aikido's aid. It was 10 minutes before. With a smile on his face and a kunai twirling on his fingertip, Aikido asked, "Now, which one of you pussies want to die first? With a murderous intent. Want to step up Chrome Dome or do you want to wait your turn?" he asked, glancing at his bald opponent. "Sui, let me take this guy," he said to his black-haired comrade, who sneered at the request. The boy he was addressing frowned and glared at Akito. Like hell. I'm gonna rip him apart for those comments earlier, he threatened, giving the shaven-headed teenager a savage look. Akito grinned and remarked, look, you're fighting over me, sorry guys but I don't swing that way, as he saw the blood vessels on his opponent's heads. God, it was so much fun to annoy people, Akito grinned. Baldy fingered his weapon and begged, Sui, please, let me have this guy, I'll rip into him enough for the two of us. As Tusi charged Akito while shouting a war cry, his comrade abruptly took off, ignoring him and leaving him in the dust. I told you no, he said. In an attempt to cut Akito's neck, he swung his kunai, but the teen with the brown hair spun away. Akito leapt and swung his leg out in a reverse roundhouse kick, twisting on the ball of his heel. He had taken inspiration from Naruto's Kenjutsu style, which used momentum to bolster his attacks. Baldy's eyes widened as he leapt back, barely escaping the kick, only to be struck by the subsequent one. He tried to glare at Akito while holding his jaw, but he had to avoid a third kick. He leapt back again and saw Akito leap up again, preparing to perform another reverse roundhouse, before Baldy threw up his forearm while holding a kunai. Akito smirked as he failed to hit his opponent's head with his roundhouse. Baldy smirked as he dropped his defenses to counterattack, but was stopped when a kunai stabbed him in the throat and a knee struck his left eye. Akito fell to the ground with a bloody kunai in his hand, and his knee and shorts were covered in blood. As he clutched his throat in a futile attempt to halt the bleeding, his opponent gazed at him incredulously. Akito raised his kunai once more and stabbed the teenager in the chest once, twice, and a third time for sure while glaring at his opponent without emotion. As his opponent slipped to his knees and collapsed beside him, dead, Akito's face was covered in blood splatters. Reminiscent of his first kill, the preteen with brown hair looked down at his kunai. When he was 9 years old, his mouth was just as filthy as it is now, if not more so because he was merely stringing together profanity without really understanding what he was saying. When he betrayed a gang leader who controlled a block in the red light district, the ordeal began. He couldn't recall what he said, how the altercation began, or even the location of the incident. He only recalled being assaulted by 3 children in a back alley. He had been beaten into the ground, lifted, and pushed closer by them. He saw a particularly sharp piece of glass while they were beating him. He garbed the shard and stabbed it into one of the boys' stomachs because he was so angry and vengeful and wanted the pain to stop. He recalled yelling as he stabbed wildly while his eyes were watering. He was unaware of the amount of time that had elapsed before the ninja police discovered him, but it had been long enough for the glass to shatter and the boy to pass away without any chance of recognition. Due to his age and the fact that he killed in self-defense, he was exonerated when his case made it to the courts. Ops. My hand slipped. Akito smirked as he ripped his gaze from the kunai and turned to face his other opponent. He looked terrible as a result. I always thought that Konoha was filled with soft pansies. Seems like I was wrong, he said, assuming a fighting stance, and his opponent, oddly, grinned back. I'm glad I could change your opinion with my humble self, Akito said before hurling his blood-covered kunai at him, but to his amazement, it bounced off his eye. His smirk turned into a full-fledged smile, making him appear even more terrifying. Shit like that won't hurt me. My Kekkei Genkai protects me from puny things like that, Sui said, smiling maniacally as a shiny substance covered his body. His body was covered in what appeared to be. As he charged, he shouted, "This is my diamond release, a Kekkei Genkai that only me and my father have." Back in the present. After that, the battle had been overwhelmingly one-sided. He overcame any defense he had because everything Akito threw at him simply bounced off that glossy skin. Even the best explosive tags available to Genin, grade 3, didn't work on him. He was thrown back, but it took him only a few seconds to stand up again. Akito looked at his opponent, who was supporting him with the collar of his shirt, and spat blood and a tooth aside. Sui grinned and said, "Ops, my hands slipped," his diamond skin glistening brilliantly in the midday light. Just like his fists, Akito spat blood onto his face, leaving the glowing, sparking surface red. Before he could really get started, Akito stopped testing his body. His arms were broken, at least 2 ribs were broken, and he was in excruciating pain. His nose was severely broken, and his right eye was swollen shut. He was a complete mess, and his opponent's desire to play with him was the only reason he survived. He uttered, "Just finish this, you shinny prick," as mist began to creep in around the edges of his vision. In order to face death the way he lived it with a foul attitude and a dirty mouth, he desired to be awake when he passed away. Sui raised his fist and said, "Gladly," but a handful of kunai bounced off him before he could land the final blow. He raised an eyebrow as he turned to see an exhausted-looking Aburame. 3 rough-looking dogs, and a bloody-looking Inuzuka. Hannah snarled and drew another kunai with an explosive tag that read, "Let him down, you shinny asshole." She didn't throw it, though, because Akito was too near the blast range. "You guys managed to beat those losers, huh?" he said, observing that 2 were unconscious, 1 appeared dead, and the other was missing. "Let's see how you punks do against a real ninja." The diamond teenager unexpectedly dropped Akito in a heap before he could fully turn to face them. Naruto marveled as his friends and team battled the ninja. They were incredible. His group was awesome. Even though they were battling 2 opponents at once, they were still winning. Well, maybe that wasn't totally accurate. Akito was losing badly, and Levi was in a rough spot. Every time he considered joining the fight to support his friends, Akito would glance over and smirk at him, telling him that everything was part of his plan. Levi appeared to have everything under control, despite the fact that he was being beaten. Besides, he had to keep Mizaki safe. He was unable to allow anything to happen to him. Naruto was anxious even though the job seemed so straightforward. The atmosphere of actual combat was unlike anything he had ever experienced, and he could see enemies in every corner. The fact that Naruto was so vigilant, though, was fortunate because he saw the 3 genin sprinting up the mountain trail behind him. Raising his tanto in a defensive stance, Naruto leapt in front of a frightened-looking Mizaki. Glaring at him and the fights raging behind him, the 3 genin came to a halt. A pink-eyed girl drew a kunai and yelled, "Get out of our way!" Tears were visible around the edges of her eyes, which glowed with rage. Rakan was killed by these jerks. Her friends were being harmed by their fight. She wanted to hit something, or even better, an enemy, because she was so furious. "No. You're gonna hurt my friends," Naruto yelled back, his eyes narrowing, his voice devoid of the panic he was experiencing. With a 2-on-1 handicap, his friends were already struggling. They would undoubtedly lose if these guys joined. Naruto tightened his hold on his tanto, preventing them from supporting their allies. That much was obvious, but he was unable to fight them while protecting Mizaki. That would not only divert his focus, but they might also take him hostage and force them to give up. But he couldn't simply carry Mizaki while he battled. He had an idea, or could he? "Sorry," Naruto said, whistling out as he unfurled the sealing scroll and pointed its white side at a bewildered Mizaki. Then, he channeled chakra into the seal, and Mizaki poofed into it. Since sealing away a living person was unhealthy, he didn't do this earlier. When Naruto let Mizaki go, he would have a terrible headache, but Naruto would rather that than see his friends perish. Before picking up his tanto, which had been stabbed into the ground, Naruto turned back to face a bewildered-looking genin team. He then reached into his ninja pouch and took out a handful of shuriken. Before he started throwing the weapons with lethal accuracy, he declared, "If you want to fight, I'll be your opponent." When the genin team successfully deflected the ninja weapons, they noticed a Naruto clone flying through hand signals. Grand Fireball. Fire release. After reciting, the clone exhaled a fireball the size of a small building. Before Akatsuchi threw his hands on the ground and a wall of earth large enough to protect the 3 of them appeared, the Iwa genin's eyes widened. They exchanged glances. They hadn't anticipated being attacked by a child. Naruto retrieved a kunai and a grade 5 explosive tag from his thigh pouch while his clone maintained the fireball. Naruto had mastered the art of creating explosive tags, which were level 2 seal. He could earn a grade 6 with a few more additions. Before hurling the kunai, Naruto fastened the seal to it. The tag sizzled menacingly as his clone stopped its jutsu and the kunai sank into the hastily created earth. Immediately recognizing the sound, Deidara grabbed Akatsuchi and Kuretsuchi before he could jump as far away as he could with them. It took a second for the tag to explode, but the bigger explosion at the mountain's base overpowered it. "Amazing. A fellow artist, Deidara exclaimed as he reached into his pouch, took out a handful of clay, and began molding, laughing as debris rained down on him and his 2 companions. "Oi, I think we should take him out before we do anything else. Everyone seems to be doing fine at the moment, but they might not if he joins the fray, Deidara said as he began to mold. "That clone could use jutsu. He could overwhelm our friends if he makes more of them," Akatsuchi nodded. The fat boy then added. "The boy may be small, but if he was like her, he still had a lot of power," Kuretsuchi said, nodding. Deidara smiled as he showed off his artwork, which just so happened to be a bird. The cartoonish bird he threw at Naruto then sailed through the air before bombing him. Unaware of the bird's identity or function, Naruto attempted to cut it in 2, but the instant his blade made contact with it, the bird exploded. Although it wasn't as big as his, Naruto was still thrown back a few feet by it. Confused and in some discomfort, Naruto got back up and noticed that the blonde teenager had added more clay to his hands. It didn't take him long to identify the clay as C4. Naruto glanced at his allies, who were too preoccupied with their own battles to notice him. Here, he couldn't allow the blonde to fight. They were all at risk because explosives had a wide range. They fought so closely together that they would all be destroyed by a single large bomb. In order to get them out of here, Naruto did the only thing that came to mind. He took off running. The boy abruptly turned around and ran away, further into the mountain, leaving the three genin momentarily perplexed. But when a tick mark appeared on Deidara's head, it was short-lived. He chased after her, shouting, "You can't just challenge me to an art contest and run. Get back here, you little shit." No one even noticed them as they ran through the fights, followed by Kuretsuchi and Akatsuchi. Glancing over, Naruto saw that the Iwa genin were pursuing him as he turned the corner, using all of his speed to carry him. He was a little perplexed, though, as to why the blonde appeared so irate. After a few minutes, when the road started to level out, he came to a stop and then turned around to wait for his rivals to catch up. They did so a few seconds later, and they launched their attack without wasting any time on formalities. Deidara shouted, "I hope you enjoyed my previous piece, because there's something better, before hurling a ball of clay at the ground in front of him. Weary but unimpressed, Naruto gazed in before the diminutive figure started to enlarge until it was almost half as large as Naruto. Its head was crushed into its body, and one arm was noticeably longer and thicker than the other, giving the impression that parts had been thrown together. One leg was as thick as a tree, while the other was barely hanging on. It was intimidating but unimpressive. He threw his hands in the air and exclaimed, "Look, there's true art," before the mass of C4 exploded, destroying a significant portion of the road and the mountainside. Naruto had Kawaramid with a rock just outside the blast radius, so he was not hit by the blast. He led them away in a sudden sense of relief. His team could have been killed by a single blast like that. Naruto made his first move before the dust had a chance to settle. He created a clone to stand next to him, and the two of them started making hand signals. Grand Fireball. Fire release. Wind release. Fantastic success, before the real Naruto breathed fire and his clone thrust out its palm, greatly fanning the flames, they both yelled in their minds. The impact was instantaneous. As Naruto's already blazing fireball ripped through the dust, it grew into an uncontrollable conflagration. Not for the first time, Naruto thanked Itachi in silence for bestowing upon him such a fantastic combination. When she heard the sounds of flames, Kuretsuchi smiled. It was time to display her abilities. As she flew past the hand signals, water release, water GU, she was interrupted when the dust was removed by the white dot hot fire. When she first saw it, her mouth fell open, and she ducked beneath Akatsuchi's earth dome. The three of them exchanged wide-eyed glances, with Deidara's insane smile appearing even more bizarre. Over the roaring flames, he exclaimed, "Amazing! I've finally found a rival worthy of my talents. If he weren't burned to a crisp, he would be dancing." Kuretsuchi reprimanded, "Shut up, Deidara." Before a smirk twitched her lips. The fireball was too strong to be a simple fire discharge. The child's fireball was likely boosted by a wind affinity. She was smiling for the same reason Deidara was. She might have discovered a competitor worth recognizing. Although she had not trained two of them and her lava jutsu was limited, she was the only person she knew with 3 affinities and a bloodline. But that wasn't really the point. She recognized the possibilities. She discovered a younger person who, like her, was significantly more developed than his peers. The only fighting she ever engaged in outside of the village was killing the bandits, and because of her heritage, everyone in Iwa took it easy on her if they didn't outright throw the match or avoid the challenge. Having potential equal to hers, Naruto was the first to fight her with all of his might. 3 sweating children and blackened earth were left behind when the fire subsided a few seconds later. Before rock flew from the ground and covered his fists, Akatsuchi said, "You guys, we have to take this seriously," glaring at Deidara. "We could get hurt if we don't," he said. "Don't worry, I'll show him the true extent of my art, Deidara said, reaching back into his pouch after Kuretsuchi and he had both nodded. But before he could shape the clay as he wanted, their adversary appeared from the ash and smoke cloud. Naruto landed a few feet away from them and then ran, Tanto in hand, alerting the 3. Kuretsuchi leapt in front of Deidara and blocked the Tanto with 2 kunai in an X formation because he couldn't finish molding clay in time. After noticing that the other person's eyes were strangely colored, Naruto raised his Tanto and leapt back. But Akatsuchi charged at him as he did. The big boy struck Naruto with a heavy, rock-covered fist. As he used his secret technique, the bloody whirlpool style, Naruto grinned under his mask. Not even as loud as a firecracker, there was a noticeable pop, followed by a loud clang. Examining his now numb, rock-covered hands, Akatsuchi leapt back. The spot where Naruto's blade struck the rock was a long, thin trench. In confusion, Akatsuchi acted out the events that had just occurred. After parrying his blow, Naruto spun around and almost severed his head in a split second. The instinct his sensei instilled in him and the fact that his arm was already in position to save his head were the only reasons he was still alive. Maybe style wasn't the best way to describe this, it was the bloody whirlpool style. Since there was no predetermined style, theory was preferable. It merely insulted the whirlpool dance style and provided several theories to support it. But since none of the suggested approaches suited Naruto's creative spirit, he decided to develop his own instead. He employed the Hyuga's foundational Kaden technique. After reading about it and its users, he worked it out. He concluded that they spun quickly by releasing chakra from their chakra points in a steady but strong stream. Naruto changed it to a sudden burst at his feet because he didn't need it, and the results were amazing. Naruto pushed ahead as Akatsuchi backed off. With a sudden leap, he lifted his tanto over his left shoulder and started swinging downward in a rightward arc. Akatsuchi raised both hands to block the blade, but he was caught completely off guard when it abruptly arced upward from the left. Kuretsuchi screamed, "Akatsuchi!" as she seized his yellow scarf, pulled it powerfully, and threw the big teenager to the ground, Naruto's blade barely missing his head by an inch. She and Deidara launched their counterattack before her larger comrade had even touched the ground. As Kuretsuchi completed her hand signals, a bug-shaped bomb slipped out of Deidara's hands and clung to Naruto. She shouted, "Earth release! Earth pillar!" as she slammed her hands to the ground. Before Deidara exploded his charge, a big, flat spear of earth struck Naruto in the stomach, pushing him away from them and back into the dust cloud. A tiny explosion followed. It was too small and hurriedly constructed to kill a ninja, but it was more than sufficient to cause some damage. With his right sleeve ripped and bleeding, Naruto hit the ground with a grunt. He realized he had become too arrogant. He believed he was untouchable simply because he was winning the first half. He stood up again, hissing lightly, and looked into the thick dust that was beginning to thin. Their three forms were staring into the dust, and he could make out a faint outline of them. But he assumed they couldn't see him yet based on the irritated words of the blonde. As directed by his teachers, Naruto inhaled deeply, shielded from the harsh air by his mask, and composed himself. He had to avoid being arrogant and underestimating his rivals. He messed up here and then died, so this wasn't a spar where he would be told what went wrong afterwards. After deciding on a strategy, Naruto tested the waters as he had been taught by taking a handful of shuriken from his ninja pouch and throwing them. When his ninja tools exploded from the smoke cloud, Akatsuchi intervened to protect his team by instantly conjuring an earth wall. He shouldn't be able to do that, Naruto mused to himself. He shouldn't be able to simply call forth an earth wall in that manner unless he had already become so proficient in the jutsu that he didn't require hand signals. Akatsuchi had one of the highest known earth affinities in Iwa history, but Naruto was unaware of this. Although he is much less skilled, his aptitude for the element is comparable to the second Hokage's affinity for water. In any case, it was giving Naruto trouble. Feeling cheated, Deidara screamed, "Get out of there, you jerk! Don't hide during our contest, Kuretsuchi shouted back, "This isn't a competition, Ni-san. We're fighting him." As he shaped his C4, Deidara swore, "No, he showed incredible art. I gave it back, and now he's hiding like a coward. Unacceptable, unacceptable, UN." He was getting ready for his upcoming fight with his new, cowardly opponent. But Kuretsuchi wasn't particularly interested in disclosing her rival. She looked for the boy in the cloud of thinning smoke. Her chest was thumping with excitement. She realized that this was different. She was looking forward to this fight, which was a huge contrast to when she had just killed the bandits. To compare their abilities and determine who was superior, who had put in more training, who was more crafty. Her pink eyes darted around quickly, searching the dust for a human-like shape. Although he might have moved, she had a suspicion based on where the ninja tools came from. Since another group of shuriken abruptly flew out of the cloud from a different location, she was correct in her assumption. Kuretsuchi charged into the dust cloud after deflecting 2 shuriken, the only ones that would have struck her. She would not simply wait for him to make plans. Although she was keen to see more, she didn't want him to get the upper hand because she had already witnessed some of his abilities. Deidara and Akatsuchi shouted, "Kuretsuchi/Kuro-chan," and then began to run after their comrade. But as soon as they did, the shuriken and kunai that were all around them puffed into Naruto's Deidara shouted, "What the?" before hurling a kunai charged with explosive chakra at one of the clones, setting it off and eliminating several of them. It didn't even affect their numbers, though. As soon as he and Deidara touched backs, Akatsuchi retreated and saw that Deidara was laughing. Then he said, "My rival is really full of surprises," before the fight started. Kuretsuchi and Naruto were also fighting among themselves in the dust cloud. Naruto's plan had also been derailed because he had not anticipated that one of them would attack him in such a manner. Before focusing his chakra on his feet and spinning quickly, Naruto swung to the right, nearly finishing the swing, and now his blade was coming from the left. But Kuretsuchi caught the blade because she already had her kunai in an X shape. Before lowering a kunai and slashing at Naruto with it, she boasted, "I figured out your trick already, it won't work on me." While smiling at him with a slightly dazed expression, he frowned as he avoided the blade, which almost cut his nose. His method seemed very clever to him, but this girl had already figured it out. He needed to step it up a notch if that was the case. Once more, Naruto engaged Kuretsuchi, his blade swinging overhead from the right before abruptly swinging underhanded from the left. As Kuretsuchi positioned her kunai, she smiled, but then she heard the loud pop once more. Instinctively, she began to roll away. That move prevented Naruto's right slash from severing her arm, albeit it was still wounded. Kuretsuchi clutched her injured shoulder and let out a painful hiss. She didn't think Naruto would spin again. After all, he could spin for hundreds of times without experiencing vertigo. She gripped her injured arm and thought, "I can't get close to him." She wouldn't be able to react in time to block the blade with her arm in this position. But that was just right for her. In any case, she was a mid-range fighter. Using a series of hand signals, Kuretsuchi exclaimed, "Lava release, lava bullet," before launching a basketball-sized glob of molten rock from her mouth. Naruto flung himself aside, his eyes widening. Kakashi.ni claimed that one of the individuals who killed the bandits in the cave was a lava user, but he was surprised to learn that it was this girl. She might have been a couple of years his senior, no more than 2. But those were the things she had done. It was she who mercilessly slaughtered those bandits. The one that killed them while they crawled over their fellows and pleaded for their lives. He was suddenly overcome by a tidal wave of sadness. Would those be things he had to do? Would he be the one to kill bandits mercilessly and without hesitation one day? Naruto quickly blinked to get the thoughts out of his mind and return his attention to the battle. His life was at stake, so he couldn't afford to stray at this point. A clone poofed beside him, crossing his fingers, and then started flying through hand signals. "Lighting release. Lightning ball," the clone said in his mind. When he extended his hand, Kuretsuchi was struck by a tiny, compressed ball of lightning. Kuretsuchi's eyes were like Naruto's, but she had a smirk on her lips. Her self-proclaimed rival appeared to be just as adept at using the 3 elements as she was. The excitement of this fight has only increased. The girl with the pink eyes narrowly avoided the ball of lightning, which was no larger than a soft ball. The lightning ball approached her more quickly than she had expected, and the static caused her hair to stand on end. The electrical ball flew by her and vanished into the surrounding dust. Before leaping back into the smoke, Kuretsuchi grabbed a kunai and threw it at the masked child, ignoring the sharp pop and the static that came from her body. After avoiding the kunai with ease, Naruto looked into the dust and considered using a wind jutsu to get rid of all the bothersome dust, but he ultimately decided against it. The other 2 would be able to see the true him and target him with their attacks if he did that. Thus, he marked off the 2 wind jutsu techniques he was familiar with from his list until further notice. His only options were his fire jutsu and the lightning jutsu he was familiar with, are the same one she had already avoided. Using a strategy from Naruto's book, Kuretsuchi hurled a few ninja weapons at him, but they were a little off, so he had to duck to the right. He was only given a shout as a warning before he had to avoid a glob of lava. But he hadn't been careful, and droplets were falling on him and molten rock splashing on the rock next to him. His arm was burning like nothing he had ever felt before, and Naruto slapped it down angrily. He had several crater marks on his headband and holes in his left sleeve that showed severely burned skin. Okay, forget about stealth. She would be air. Hammered into the ground by him. Naruto then slammed his closed fist into his hand in a clapping motion, his knuckles striking the palm of his other hand as he flew through the hand. Signs for his jutsu. Before lurching forward and into the mountain in front of him, the air condensed. When the dust finally settled, it became clear that Kuretsuchi had just stepped out of his jutsu's range and was staring at him with wide eyes. He caught a glimpse of the other 2 staring at him out of the corner of his eye. An entrance to the mountain was also made visible by the dust dispersal. The entrance appeared to have been covered with only a few feet of rock. As he shaped C4 and threw it at Naruto, Deidara exclaimed, "Haha, so you finally show yourself, But one of Naruto's clones leapt in front of the explosive before it could reach the creator. Before launching himself at Kuretsuchi, Naruto sent a silent prayer for the courageous clone. She was currently the weakest and needed to be eliminated before he could take on the other two. When Kuretsuchi noticed this, he withdrew and cautiously made his way to the cave's entrance. She was allowing herself space to counterattack after sensing Naruto's abilities up close. But she wasn't the only one who noticed, and Deidara's head developed a sizable tick mark. Why was Kuretsuchi the center of attention for his rival? How about their competition? Deidara became furious and gathered all of his C4 into a ball, concentrating his will and desires into it before hurling it into the air, where it started to change. It was the best piece of art Deidara had ever produced, a masterpiece. Before plummeting to the ground, its wings catching the wind and arching in Naruto's direction, it transformed and grew until it reached adult size. A magnificent dragon replaced the enormous ball of C4. When his creation arrived at the cave's entrance, Deidara grinned at it and set it off. He became aware that Kuretsuchi was within the blast radius at that moment. Peeking over his shoulder, Naruto saw the pale gray beast pursuing him into the mouth of the cave. As he increased his speed, his eyes widened, but he was still moving too slowly. The dragon's gray, lifeless eyes gazed at him before going white and exploding. The artwork was the best Deidara had ever produced. The enormous explosion caused the wind to blow and the ground to tremble. He waited for the wind to subside, covering his eyes with his arms. When it did, he noticed that Kuretsuchi and Naruto were gone and the road was completely gone. He noticed that it had caved when he turned to face the cave that had been there only moments before. The entrance was covered in large pieces of debris and rubble. All he could do was hope Kuretsuchi was still alive. Naruto lay motionless, his body aching and his head ringing. After blinking once and then twice, he crawled to his knees and stood up. Placing a hand against his forehead, he saw something wet there. It was too dark to see, but he was certain it was blood. He moaned softly as he struggled to stand up, swaying a little, and then he turned to face the world. By directing some chakra into his eyes, he was able to make out the faint shapes of the rocks surrounding him despite the extreme darkness. When he saw his opponent standing roughly 20 feet away, he realized he wasn't the only one doing this. Both of them were alert at once, reaching for their weapons only to discover that they were missing. Only the scroll containing Mizaki and a shuriken remained in Naruto's ninja pouch after his tanto was torn from his grasp during the explosion. Although she only had one kunai, Kuretsuchi was in a similar state. Before they could finish, the ground beneath them rocked, and they both glared at one another before starting to make hand signals. As they looked around in confusion, they saw that they were caved in and that many of the stalactites and stalagmites were breaking under the weight of the mountain, with several of them breaking as they looked at them. Both ran left, deeper into the mountain, after realizing the implication, and the cave continued to cave in a second later. From the sky, debris rained down in pieces as big as houses and as small as children. Running as quickly as their legs would allow, Naruto and Kuretsuchi dove deeper into the mountain, their chakra enhanced eyes the only thing allowing them to see anything. The cave gradually grew smaller and smaller until the two kids were running shoulder to shoulder for their lives. They pumped their legs, aware that they were close to being crushed as they felt the pebbles of broken rock strike them in the back. But the unimaginable occurred when they came to a passage that the cave reopened. Kuretsuchi stumbled. The 8-year-old girl hit the ground and tried, but was unable, to maintain her momentum as she fell forward with a disbelieving expression on her face. For a few seconds, she rolled wildly before stopping and staring up at the cave's ceiling. At that moment, she noticed that a sizable piece of rock was falling, its trajectory terminating precisely where she lay. Kuretsuchi's body seized with fear. She did not want to die in this manner. Some cave that no one would ever go to. Far from her family and all her friends. Not because a rock fell on her, but because she wanted to die in combat. She clenched her eyes shut, not wanting to see how she died, her heart thumping. Next to him, Naruto could no longer hear the pitter-patter of shoes. He was perplexed. Had the girl taken a different route? Did she abandon him? When he ventured to peek over his shoulder and look behind him, he saw it. The girl was directly on top of the big piece of debris that fell. He realized she was going to die, and his heart leapt to his throat. For some reason, he froze just as she was about to be crushed to death. Mentally, of course, rather than physically. She would die. He didn't even know the name of the girl who was going to die at the hands of a rock. He was bothered by that. As the shinobi world gradually transformed him, Naruto had no idea what he would become as an adult. He was unsure about his identity, what he would see, and what he would do. The great contradictions of the shinobi world, such as how murderers defend their homes by murdering those who sought to defend theirs, were beyond his knowledge. How people are killed in return for killing others in retaliation for their fallen allies. He had no idea what his place in the overall scheme of things would be. Would he be a rock in the river, going against the current, or would he follow the current? However, he was aware of one thing. He was clearly afraid and frightened, but he wasn't the kind of person who could just watch someone die. He had to take action, regardless of whether it was his best friend or his enemy. He wasn't sure if his generosity and selflessness would last forever. He might be completely consumed by the shinobi path he chose, but he would save as many people as he could before it did. For the simple reason that Uzumaki Naruto does that. Naruto turned around and quickly went over 100 different plans in 1 second. He had an Uzumaki brain, which was optimized for Fuinjutsu and could process 100 different thoughts in a second. Since the pieces would be large enough to kill her, he was unable to use an explosive tag. He lacked the speed to dash over and back, the swordsmanship to cut the rock in two, the chakra to create a human rope and 30 or so shadow clones, and the ability to create a big, dense air hammer to smash the rock away. As he watched helplessly as the rock fell, all of these and countless other thoughts went through his head. Is he even capable of saving her? Naruto's chest grew heavy with despair and desperation as he searched for a way to save the girl. As he thrust out his arm, everything suddenly exploded in his chest. Denial, anger, sadness, and outrage. To his astonishment, a pure chakra arm that resembled the purest sapphires appeared from his palm. His eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed in concentration. If he wasn't focused, he could feel the arm losing its shape. The blue arm extended until it came close to and seized Kuretsuchi's fallen body. Snap! Kuretsuchi cried out in agony as her leg broke, the first of many bonesa, but a moment later, she was sailing through the air rather than being crushed to death. She hit the ground with a loud thump, screaming and moaning in agony as her leg was jostled, her eyes widening in shock before closing again. She lay motionless for a while before opening her eyes once more and discovering, much to her relief, that she was still alive. However, how? Why wasn't she dead, and how did she sail through the air? She heard the pitter-patter of sandals hitting stone as if to answer her question, and then he threw her over his shoulder roughly. "It's not safe here," he said, but her mind didn't believe what she was hearing. He saved her, but why? Did he simply forget that only 5 minutes prior, they had been attempting to murder one another? Was he simply a moron? Or did he fit the description of a hero? For almost 5 minutes, he sprinted in that manner. The debris gradually started to taper off and eventually stopped. They went on in silence, Naruto wondering what the blue arm was, and Kuretsuchi trying not to scream with every step. What was that? Naruto looked at his palm and tried to push the arm out again, but it just wouldn't come out. He attempted to concentrate but was unable to do so because his thoughts were scattered too much. Did he need to worry about the girl killing him? What was the blue arm? Where was the exit? What was he supposed to do with the girl? After failing, Naruto made the decision to leave and ask Kakashi.ni about it. He will be aware of what to do. Kuretsuchi grunted and moaned as she moved her leg as Naruto stepped through a large opening and placed her down. He moved to the middle of the gap, took out his scrolla, the same one in which Mizaki was imprisoned, and poured some chakra into it. Before Naruto used his fire release to light it, firewood poofed into being. The dark cavern was then illuminated by light from the bonfire jutsu. Naruto saw for the first time that the walls surrounding him were marked, now that he could see more than a blurry outline. They appeared white, as if someone had written arrows on the cavern walls using a knife or another rock. Without anticipating a response, Naruto asked out loud, "Who did these?" He was still given one, though. Kuretsuchi muttered, "Bandits probably," as she peered into the flames before snatching up a few sticks and tying them together to form a splint on either side of her leg. She was still aware of it, though, when Naruto gave her a curious glance. Before responding, she inhaled deeply, wondering why she was even bothering. This is the only road on this mountain, so bandits probably found this natural cavern and sealed it off using a minor earth jutsu. Some can use chakra and a few supplementary jutsu. They're still bandits since they're not trained. They would then wait for a caravan to pass by and jump out to grab it, take the stuff and walk back to their base that was a few feet away, Kuretsuchi said in a monotone voice. When he thought of the copses that covered the road where his team fought, Naruto was about to ask if they should be concerned about whether there were still bandits. However, the question died in his throat. "A few days ago me and my team came across a cave filled with," Naruto said, trailing off, but it was clear what he was implying. "That was you, wasn't it?" he asked, breaking the brief silence that followed. Kuretsuchi recoiled as though struck. She was too familiar with the cave Naruto was referring to. She didn't respond at first, and after a few minutes, Naruto questioned whether she would ever do so, but then she gave a small nod. Her eyes narrowed at him after she said, "Yes, that was me." In a low voice. "Why? Why do you want to know? You want to know how they screamed? How they begged? How it felt as I just tore through them, like they were butter and I was the knife? You want to know how it felt?" Kuretsuchi screamed, her eyes burning with sadness and rage. She had succeeded in forgetting. She had at last been able to divert her attention from her actions, and the abyss of guilt was slowly but surely sinking. And now, out of pure curiosity, this child, her savior and enemy, reminds her of it? The sudden outburst caused Naruto's eyes to widen, but he quickly recalled a conversation he had overheard between Suzuki and Kakashi.ni. How the bandits were killed by a lava user who was emotional and new to killing. Before saying the words he felt she needed to hear, the words he hoped someone would say to him when he looked like Hera, he gazed into her angry, guilty eyes, thinking that one day he might have eyes like that. When he said, "You aren't a bad person," Kuretsuchi gave him a disbelieving look. Seeing the skepticism on her face, he shrugged and said, "You didn't kill me," as if it were clear what he was referring to. "What?" Her eyes narrowed. Using reasoning that only children can understand, Naruto explained, "When we were fighting, I got cocky and you could have killed me had you used an earth spear instead of an earth pillar. But you didn't. Your first reflex isn't to kill, so you're not a bad person." After a few moments of staring at Naruto, Kuretsuchi started laughing uncontrollably. Her laughter reverberated throughout the cave, bouncing off the walls. Beneath his mask, Naruto began to look at her with concern. He realized that this was not a joyful laugh. Someone who was on the verge of going insane laughed at this. Her laugh gradually faded into giggles and then a faint chuckle. "Why?" she asked, her voice worn out, as though they were at the end of their rope. Looking at Naruto, she leaned back and asked, "Why are you trying to make me feel better? Why did you save me? Just why?" "Because. I know one day that I'm not going to be this way," Naruto said softly with a shrug before taking a seat across from her. "One day I'm going to kill people and do bad things. Kakashi.ni says that okay since I'm doing it to protect my home, but," he concluded with another shrug. In an attempt to identify the boy in front of her, Kuretsuchi said, "So, what, you want to be a hero before you become the bad guy?" More than any riddle or puzzle, he baffled her. The boy scoffingly said, "You do realize that we're from different villages, right? Two villages that hate each other," as she went on. He said, "I don't care about that stuff. You needed help so I helped you," as if he didn't need extra encouragement. Taken aback by his response, Kuretsuchi scrutinized the boy. Were his intentions truly that straightforward? Did he truly make an effort to lift her spirits and save her because he thought he should? As if anyone ought to do it, regardless of who, what, when, where, or why. In her village, strength was the most important quality, so she had never encountered someone like that before. People bullied the weak instead of helping them. Kuretsuchi believed in the philosophy, even though she had never engaged in active bullying before. The strong only needed the weak to survive. Iwa perceived Konoha as soft in part because of this ideal, which ran counter to Konoha's concept of the will of fire. Knowing that she would have died if it weren't for Naruto's gentle disposition, Kuretsuchi thought, maybe it's not so bad. He not only saved her life, but his words also made her feel less guilty. He wasn't killed by her. When given the chance, her first instinct was not to kill, even though she had the ability, the opportunity, and the motivation. She had been afraid that she would turn into a heartless murderer, but that made her feel so much better in ways she couldn't explain. She was mistaken, but she was a true shinobi. She didn't kill out of reflex or instinct. Even though she was a murderer, she was still Kuretsuchi. She was still herself. The disrespectful, loud-mouthed girl who loved her home more than words can express. There was silence as Kuretsuchi contemplated the mystery that was Naruto, while Naruto contemplated the strange blue arms and how to escape. But then the quiet was broken. "Kuretsuchi," she murmured, looking into the flames. "What? Kuretsuchi. That's my name," she shrugged slightly. She felt that Naruto should know her name because he has done so much for her in such a short, hectic period of time. Before he smiled under his mask, Naruto read his eyes and said, "Uzumaki Naruto, it's a pleasure to meet you." His smile was concealed by his mask. As if they had recently become best friends, Kuretsuchi's lips quirked at the boy's unexpectedly upbeat demeanor. Instead of being imprisoned inside a cave, one would assume they were in a park. For a brief moment, they fell into another cozy silence before Naruto raised the topic. He looked into the fire and said, "So, do you have any ideas how to get out of here?" Kuretsuchi shrugged her shoulders and said, "Bandits used this place so they probably have a second entrance that we can use as an exit. understanding that she would either have to crawl, walk on a broken leg, or be carried again because she was still unsure of how her leg broke. No, absolutely not. Before she allowed herself to be carried again, she would die. In order to get Kuretsuchi's opinion, Naruto nodded and said, "That makes sense," before getting up and examining the arrows that were periodically marked on the walls. "Do you think we should just backtrack these arrows?" he asked. She was as desperate to leave as he was. "Sounds good to me," Kuretsuchi said after pausing for a moment and nodding. Then, with one leg splinted between two sticks, she forced herself onto it and hobbled toward the fire. "I'm taking point," she said in a competitive tone as she grabbed a flaming stick and turned to face Naruto. Naruto allowed his eyes to narrow before reaching for his own torch. The pace at which they were compelled to accompany Kuretsuchi at one point likely contributed to the two of them following the arrows for what seemed like an eternity. If it weren't for the arrows, they would have become hopelessly lost as they took detours. They replaced their burning sticks with a barrel of torches after retracing their steps into the mountain's interior. They trekked through the dark, keeping to themselves. They both didn't know or want to say anything. They had made an effort to strike up a conversation, but it soon devolved into discussing their individual villages and what life was like and where things were. They had quickly clammed up about those details and stopped engaging in small talk. While he plodded downhill, Naruto reflected, "We've been walking down this slope for a while." They were getting close to ground level, if Naruto had to guess. They had previously descended a few slopes similar to this one, but the arrows directed them to go here. He glanced at Kuretsuchi, noting the sheen of sweat on her forehead and how much more exaggerated her hobbling appeared. He knew she wore a pained expression, even though he could only see half of her face at a time. She must have been suffering from leg pain. Despite his limited acquaintance with her, he could tell she was just as obstinate as Akito, if not more so, and would never acknowledge any weakness. He would have to be the one, then. "Hey, I'm tired, can we take a break?" he said in a voice that was a little whiny, like any child's. After pausing and dabbing at her perspiration, Kuretsuchi took charge and leaned heavily against the wall. "I guess, if you really want to. No more than 5 minutes though," she said. She exhaled slightly in relief, which attracted Naruto's attention. "I can see." He began, but Kuretsuchi interrupted him with a stern glare. As the flame's light danced around her face, she declared, "1. I'm not going to accept charity from the enemy. 2. There is no way in hell I'm letting anyone carry me. Ever." A little let down, Naruto sighed and said, "We're still enemies?" He truly couldn't be indifferent to someone's origins. He meant what he said. His only criteria for adding someone to his slowly expanding list were whether or not they were nice, and if they were, he wanted to be friends with them. "Of course we're still enemies. Just because we're teaming up now doesn't mean we're friends. Konoha and Iwa hate each other. 3 wars and your yellow flash slaughtering a third of our forces will do that," she said with an angry, stern voice. She felt her blood boil when she thought about that man. She had grown up surrounded by the rage and destruction he inflicted, despite the fact that she had only been a year old when the massacre occurred. She grew up with a lot of orphans running around in deserted streets. She realized it was war, and war kills people. She even realized that Konoha likely had an equal number of orphans and that their suffering was equal. However, almost a third of their ninja population was killed by no one man. Konoha was not the one who had endured so much humiliation. It wasn't Konoha that saw a precipitous drop in missions and the impending collapse of their economy. She didn't particularly dislike Konoha, but she didn't like the village either. She loved her village too much and they had hurt each other too much for her to have an objective opinion. Saying, "I don't hate you, so why can't we be friends?" Naruto shrugged his shoulders. Kuretsuchi sighed and turned to face the boy, who was staring back at her with a hopeful expression on his face. "My little history lesson went way over your head, didn't it?" she asked. Naruto, who had been alone all his life, was desperate for friendship. So what if Konoha and Iwa hate each other? "I don't hate you and I don't think you hate me. So, doesn't that mean we can be friends?" he asked. Was it really that important to him that she was his friend? Kuretsuchi gave him a surreal look. A voice in the back of her mind said, "He saved your life, and then he carried you instead of leaving you for dead." He came from a different village, though. He did, however, save her life. But she could tell by the mask that his brother had killed Rakan. However, he saved her life and didn't abandon her in the dark and with a broken leg. However, she was brought up to despise Konoha ninja. However, he demonstrated that he deserved her respect. However, they are meant to be adversaries. However, he was able to reduce her guilt. "Fine. I'll be your friend," she said with a hint of irritation after clenching her teeth and letting out an exaggerated sigh. She was somewhat pleased that the strange boy wanted to be her friend, even though she spoke harshly. She didn't have many friends because of her prodigy status, her father's intimidating presence, and the fact that her grandfather was the Tsuchikage. Akatsuchi and Deidara.ni were the only people she had as friends. Naruto exclaimed, "Great," as he added Kuretsuchi's name to his mental list of all his pals. His 13th friend was her. Indulgently, Kuretsuchi observed Naruto's joy at her acceptance as his friend. Maybe he was just like her? Perhaps people avoided him for whatever reason, making it difficult to form friendships? Kuretsuchi leaned off the wall and started to walk again, Naruto right behind her, still grinning. "Okay, stop jumping around. We have to get out of here," she said. Kakashi was unable to move. Every movement seemed to be in slow motion, and everything hurt. He had weights strapped to his legs and arms, which felt like lead. His mask was soaked with sweat, and his exposed skin had a damp sheen. Ignoring the sharp pain in his ribs and the difficulty of the action, Kakashi took a ragged breath. His left arm and at least 3 ribs were broken, and his body was covered in burns and cuts of various sizes, which only made his excruciating pain worse. With his Sharingan eye closed to preserve his remaining chakra, he looked to his right and steadied Suzuki. Because she lacked the Sharingan to alert her, she was in a worse state than he was. She stood with her legs shaking and the kunai in her hand shaking wildly. Her right eye was still closed, and one side of her face was covered in dried blood. She preferred her right leg and her left arm hung uselessly. She was in a state of disarray and appeared to be struggling to stay upright, let alone fight. His gaze returned to their adversary, who appeared exhausted and drenched in perspiration, but he lacked their debilitating wounds. Although they had delivered numerous blows, Kitsuchi, a master of taijutsu, mitigated the harm that would have been done. As his own kunai shook a little, Kakashi thought, "I really don't know how to win this one." His body was too damaged to make an escape, he was out of chakra, and he wouldn't even be able to use a C rank. Not that he would. He wasn't going to desert a comrade, and Suzuki didn't even appear to be able to walk more than a few steps before passing out. As if reading his mind, Suzuki glanced at him and attempted a small smile, but the light quickly left her eyes and she passed out. With a curse, Kakashi leapt aside and placed himself between Suzuki and Kitsuchi. His opponent grunted at the action. He said, "Defending the weak is going to get you killed," but it didn't really matter. When he learned that Rakan had been killed in combat, his father was about to lose it and would suffer from an aneurysm if his son also perished. He could at least remove some other Jonin and Konoha's copycat ninja. That should be enough to stop the elderly man from destroying everything in his path. "I would rather die than let you kill a comrade," Kakashi said, squinting his eyes, in the hopes that Naruto would pardon him. Kitsuchi laughed and slammed his fists together. "If that's the case, then I'll be more than happy to end you," he said, but the mountain was rocked by an explosion before he could jump at the silver-haired man. Even this far, the ground shook, suggesting that whatever had exploded was massive and strong. Kitsuchi's mouth fell open as he saw the mountainside covered in a cloud of dust and large pieces of loose material pouring down. Even though the scene was horrifying, he was unable to turn away because he was only thinking about one thing. Deidara is having problems. He turned away and gritted his teeth in exasperation as he glanced at his 2, now 1, opponents. That amount of C4 was used by his student because whoever or whatever was up there was strong enough. Even though he wasn't the most composed or sane person, Deidara knew better than to simply toss all that C4 around with his teammates in close proximity. Then he had an idea, his heart was filled with icy fear. What if his teammates had passed away already? Could it be that Deidara was simply seeking revenge? Kuretsuchi, he thought, his gaze flitting from Kakashi to the mountain. Had his daughter passed away? Was she murdered? Or did he think too much? He would know if she were dead, wouldn't he? There must have been a parental instinct telling him that his daughter was okay. Before focusing on Kakashi, who was staring at him with an unreadable emotion in his eye, his gaze flicked back to the mountain. He soon discovered that it was worry, the same feeling in his own. Kitsuchi said, "We'll settle this some other time, Hitaki," and then he started running in the direction of the mountain. He always prioritized his daughter. Instead of letting himself sag in relief, Kakashi turned to face Suzuki, limped over to her, threw her over his shoulder, her legs scarring the floor, and grunted in agony. He started to limp toward the mountain. "Come on, Suzu-chan. We have to check up on our genin as well," Kakashi said. "Please, Naruto, please, please, be okay." Hana was experiencing double vision and no, triple vision. She was struggling to stand and the idea of spinning quickly made her want to throw up, so forget about attempting to pull off a Suga. She discovered the hard way that her head wasn't nearly as hard as Diamond, but not that she would anyway. Her head split open, and blood covered her face, concealing the red triangle tattoos. She thought the other 2 of her nin. Dogs had lost all will to fight, and one of them was down as they struggled to stand beside her. She completely understood, and she was also running low on gas. Looking to her right, she saw Levi in the dirt, face down. Either from his severe injuries or from chakra exhaustion, he passed out a while ago. The Juggernaut broke through Levi's defense because the Academy style had failed to stop him. He didn't even try to use his trump card because it would have been a waste because his bugs wouldn't have worked against Sui's impenetrable skin. Sending a few insects to cover Sui's eyes and give them a brief respite was the best he could do. As a result, Hannah was the only one opposing the Juggernaut, and she knew she wouldn't be able to endure much longer. She was furious at what she saw when she turned to face her opponent with her kunais shaking in her hands. Not that she really believed they could, but they hadn't even succeeded in scratching the diamond skin. There were no wounds on the radiant teenager, and the only blood on them was their own. He was able to remain covered in diamond throughout their battle, which is why, by simply transforming his skin into fluid diamond, he could accomplish this without depleting his genin reserves, something his father was unable to accomplish. Rakan, his father, was the first to have this Keke Genke, and since he was the second case, some of the flaws had been removed, proving that the theory of evolution was correct in their situation. Furthermore, it had grown more powerful. You know, I'm gonna be honest, I'm kinda impressed that you managed to last this long. Even some Jonin don't last this long against me, Sui said, smiling at Hannah as he saw how unresponsive she was. To be honest, that was only because they were either too smart to harm him or couldn't do anything to stop him. With an angry tone, Hannah scoffed, although her voice sounded more like a wheeze. I feel so honored, she said. With a casual shrug, Sui said, just thought you'd like to know before you die, and then he began to approach. As the teenager got closer, the Haimaru brothers gave him a ferocious snarl, but it didn't deter him much. Ignoring Hannah's cries for him to stop, one of the battered dogs lunged at the teen wearing the diamond, but Sui kicked him away before he could bite him. He muttered, shitty mutt, and went on to walk. Hannah retreated with every step until she was just one stride away from plummeting off the mountainside. Thinking that Akito had been correct about the drop, she glanced over her shoulder before turning to glare at her opponent. To jump and kill yourself. Or get beaten to death by me. Neither option seems very appealing, but I would recommend the second one. At least one of us would enjoy it, Sui said with a sadistic smile that never left his face. With tears welling up in the corners of her eyes, Hannah swallowed. This was not how she could pass away. She couldn't perish on her first actual mission, or on a mountain far from home. She had a lot of things and people to see, as well as goals to accomplish. But what could she do? She lost everything she owned to this guy, and she was no longer in a fit state to fight. Did she simply give up? She was aware of Sui's preference for playing with his opponents and how painful it was to be struck by those hard, heavy fists. Her death would not have been painless if she had resisted him. Did she jump, then? She fell freely for a few seconds before hitting the ground, right? She could even act like she wasn't killing herself while flying. As she gazed at her opponent, the blood of her allies drying on his impenetrable skin, the option attracted her. Thinking about how she wanted to die, she had long since given up on winning, until one of her canine companions bit her leg. She glanced back over her shoulder. Since none of the brothers had ever bitten her before, she was shocked as she looked down and saw the blood oozing from her leg where her partner's teeth had penetrated her skin. His eyes were cold as he gazed up at her, they were angry and disappointed. In that moment, she realized that her partners were furious with her, upset that she would even choose the first option. She gave a small smile, and her partner let go of her leg and snarled at Sui, who raised an eyebrow at the display. She had no intention of jumping. Damn it, she was an Inuzuka. The greatest clan in the entire fucking world in Konoha. The terms, give up, and quit, were unfamiliar to her clan. They gave their all in everything they did, and either they succeeded in their goals or they perished trying. With determination in her eyes, Hannah clutched her kunai. Piss off, I'm not dying here, she growled, causing her opponent to chuckle. He said, oh, you still have some fight left. Good, hell, maybe you're right. Maybe I'll take you back to Iwa as a trophy instead of killing you, and then he started to charge. However, an explosion ripped through the mountain just before he and Hannah engaged, shaking everything. Leaping away from the edge of the mountains, Hannah grabbed her canine companions and dove forward. Rock pummeled her as she dove inward and placed her dog companions in the safest location she could find, while rubble rained down from above, obstructing her view of Sui. But she still had work to do because she needed to locate her human companions. She noticed that Levi and Akito were still lying where they had been unconscious. With her arms wrapped around her head, she ran back out and came dangerously close to the edge to save her friends. Before throwing Akito over her shoulder, She grabbed his sleeve and heard him grunt in agony before he fell silent. Hannah turned to face Levi, attempting to make out his figure through the accumulating dust and pebbles that obscured her field of vision. She noticed him lying close to the edge, attempting to stand but being unable to do so due to his broken body. Hannah's eyes locked with Levi's and she reached out, hoping he would at least move his arms. To her relief, he did. Before the unimaginable occurred, they clasped hands. A sizable piece of debris fell onto the road beside them, causing a significant section of the road to collapse along with it. With their hands struggling to hold each other together, Hannah screamed as the road split between her and Levi, but it was in vain. Levi slipped out of her hold and fell slowly with the rock he was wearing, his face plastered with shock and disbelief. With fear on her face, Hannah screamed, "Levi," as she reached for her comrade, but in a split second, Akito's expression changed from one of utter shock to one of resigned reluctance to a slight smirk. Levi barely moved his lips as he spoke to her before his head disappeared beneath the mountain's base, before turning away from the mountain edge and toward her nin. Dogs. Hannah bit her lip to stop the tears from streaming from her eyes. She still needed to keep Akito safe. She let herself cry when they were all huddled together because she couldn't hear Levi's final words. After what felt like 3 forevers, Kuretsuchi took in her first breath of fresh air. Almost an hour after their previous break, she and Naruto had finally made it off the mountain. At last, the arrows had reached a dead end. They initially believed they were in a bad spot, but in a fit of rage, Naruto airhammered the dead end, and they discovered it was just a thin layer of rock blocking the entrance. In contrast to the stale air they had been breathing for hours, Naruto stood beside her and breathed in some fresh air. Before turning to face him, he glanced at Kuretsuchi, who was enjoying the light of the approaching dusk. Naruto said, "You weren't lying. Were you? You really will be my friend," his anxious expression visible in his eyes. But he didn't need to worry because Kuretsuchi nodded. "Yeah, we're friends," she said, glancing down at the boy who had become her savior, rival, enemy, and friend all in one day. Although he was a mystery, Kuretsuchi was confident that she would eventually figure him out. Naruto grinned under his mask and said, "Good. I guess this is where we part ways. I recognize this path from one we took up the mountain, so Kakashi.ni is nearby, for example." After nodding, Kuretsuchi turned to Naruto and offered a hand. "You know, I still haven't seen what you look like," she said as Naruto shook her hand. "I'm not too far away from the regrouping point Pops made," she added. He used his free hand to pull down his mask, exposing a face with 3 whisker marks on each cheek and a foxy grin. Kuretsuchi simply grinned and let go. "See ya around Uzumaki, Naruto," she said, then turned away from him and started to walk in the opposite direction. Naruto said, "Yeah, see ya around," and turned to leave. Neither would be aware that their next encounter would be as adversaries. When Levi opened his eyes, he saw nothing at all. Where was he, his heart thumping in his chest? What took place? What brought him here? All of these ideas went through his head before his composed manner took over and he addressed each question individually. Where had he gone? He was in the harem, a location designated for clan members when their hives were running low. It was a completely dark structure that used pheromones to encourage the insects to reproduce quickly. Whole hives could be filled in a day when using secret technique. Cocoon. He didn't know what happened after the fight because he had used the technique afterward. What brought him here? During his altercation with the teenager with the black hair, his hive reached critical levels. His Kakaichu had been virtually destroyed against him, and he had already been in the red when it came to hornets. What took place? A flashback would be the most effective way to tell that story. Rewind when Levi's hand left Hannah's, he saw that she appeared frightened by the suggestion, and his eyes widened in surprise. As he dipped slowly, a great chunk of the cliff fell with him. Was his death imminent? For him, was it really over? Did his life end like this, before it had a chance to start? No, it wasn't. Why, you ask? What could possibly keep him from plummeting to his inevitable demise? The solution was straightforward. It was his secret weapon. The butterfly known as the venom hawk, Aconitum plexippus. The species that would save him was his third. "Don't worry, I can fly," he told Hannah with a slight smile before his head sank beneath the edge of the road that was left. Before he knew it, he was covered in dust. He summoned his third species of insect and used the last of his chakra to command them to save him. Butterflies flew from his body to answer his call. Aconitum plexippus is a red butterfly with large wings that are adorned with black trim. Their wingspan was several inches longer than the typical butterflies, roughly the length of your hand. They also differed significantly in that they had a small, round mouth lined with venom. Dripping, razor. sharp teeth rather than an antenna to drink nectar from flowers. On the list of insects with the highest venom, they came in at number 3. But since this species didn't exist 3 years ago, it was only recently added to the list. The species was created in one of the Aburame labs, which were designed to create or enhance insect species. Selective breeding, chakra mutations, adaptation, and evolution were used to achieve this. Because he had previously successfully combined 2 invasive species, he was given the chance to combine Aconitum plexippus with his hive, which proved to be the most successful of the experiments. As they gripped his shirt, his butterflies hooked on each other until it appeared as though 2 butterfly wings were protruding from his back and flapping in perfect unison. Before diving toward the ground and landing, he sailed through the air, avoiding the dust cloud that surrounded the mountain. His butterflies raced back inside him as he landed gently, but not nearly as many as had previously emerged. He felt almost half of his butterflies fall to the ground around him, shrivel into balls, and then fall away. Because they were easily overstressed, the Aconitum plexippus died. They might perish if they put in too much work or moved too much. Levi and the scientists were plagued by this issue, which they attempted to resolve but were unable to do so since they were unsure of its cause. With each generation of the butterfly, they could only rule out one potential cause. Levi ignored the excruciating pain he felt all over and said a silent thank you to his insect before turning away to look for the rest of his team. He detested the fact that his insect died for him. Final flashback that clarified everything for him. Levi's eyes gradually adapted to the darkness, and with the aid of some chakra, he was able to distinguish outlines and shapes. Levi got out of the bed he was lying on, sat up, and walked out of the room. His insects would have been in the green zone if he was awake. Levi still winced when the light hit his eyes, but he was glad he had his sunglasses on because he noticed a woman standing at the doorway as the slight pain subsided. As is typical of all Aburame, she wore a high-collared shirt that covered the lower half of her face, but the upper half showed off her attractive features. When he opened the door, she looked up and made a little bow to recognize him. "I am glad to see you doing well, Levi-san," she stated. "It is 12 o'clock and your father will be arriving shortly," she went on. Levi nodded. Despite his advanced age, he was highly esteemed. One of the 3 distinct species he carried within himself was experimental. Even outside of his clan, people who were aware of the Aburame were already muttering his name with reverence. Levi's father quietly but confidently walked into the building to demonstrate the truth of what she had said. Levi turned to face his dad, and both he and the women bowed respectfully. In the Third Shinobi War, his father had established himself. His father then motioned for Levi to follow him. "I am glad to see that you are well," he said. "You have been out for a while. Your butterflies are what took the longest considering the stages they must go through to become butterflies." Aburame was walking through the clan compound as hives hung over their heads. Out of everyone in the compound, there were only 2 kids. A boy wearing a black mask that covered half of his face and the clan heir. Levi pondered absently whether he ought to present Naruto to them. The largely blonde boy appeared to be quite tolerant of the peculiarities and inclinations of his clan. "Hitaki-san and Uzumaki-san are giving their reports now, so I am not clear on what occurred on your mission and why it was necessary for you to use secret technique. Cocoon. I was hoping that you could answer a few questions for me," his dad said when they arrived at their residence. Levi's mother heard the 2 come in while she was making tea in the kitchen. Before she entered the living room, she dropped everything she was doing and picked up a ladle that was always hanging close to the window perch. Like all Aburames, the woman's lower half of her face was hidden when both men looked at her, but they could tell she was furious. Levi was not interrupted when he said, "Mother," but was suddenly interrupted by the ladle slamming on top of his head. His mother slammed the ladle down on him and cried out, "Don't mother me. What were you thinking? You could have died, Levi, just to be safe." When his mother slammed the ladle on him and yelled that it wasn't funny, Levi ignored his father's light laughter and rubbed the top of his head in agony. A tiny smile appeared on Levi's face. Why was his mother one of the more irrational and expressive Aburames? She married into the clan when she was in her mid-20s, and although she took on some of their appearance, her personality stayed the same. His mother gave the 2 a stern look and said, "Now, tell me what happened on your mission," before having an epiphany and exclaiming, "I've already made tea," before leaving the room to return to the kitchen. Before his mother returned, Levi and his father were already talking about the mission's contents at the little table. "Oh, yes, it was nice to be alive." Hiruzen inhaled deeply as he looked at the individuals in front of him. All but the smallest were severely injured and covered in bandages. They appeared to be trying to transform into mummies because they were so heavily bandaged or covered in casts. "So, after you escaped from the cave, you followed the road until you meet back up with Kakashi, correct?" Hiruzen repeated as the god of shinobi turned to face the smallest of them, who was still wearing a mask that concealed any expression on his face. He had just listened to Naruto's account of the mission from his perspective. This was a unique situation, but normally he would have the ninja involved write a report. He needed to hear it directly because the team +2 had experienced a lot on their first C rank. The client, who had been overjoyed to escape the insane ninja, was taken to the hospital for a rough patch. Up job after the battered and broken ninja successfully delivered them to the land of tea. At that point, Kakashi called Pakun and asked him to deliver a request for medics and a retrieval team. After putting the ninja in sealing scrolls, the retrieval team carried them back to Konoha, where they underwent surgery. While Levi was recuperating at his clan's compound, Suzuki and Akito remained in the hospital, but their conditions appeared to be stable. Kakashi insisted on attending the debriefing even though he should have been there too. Yeah, Hokage. Sama, Naruto nodded, momentarily losing sight of the fact that he was speaking to his boss rather than his grandfather figure. Hearing the trip up, Hiruzen grinned slightly but said nothing. Now, can you show me what, blue arm, that you were talking about Naruto-kun? Hiruzen asked, taking another breath, and Naruto nodded. Taking hold of his wrist, he concentrated only on making the strange blue hand appear, and it did so gradually. The hand itself was in normal shape until it hovered a few inches above Naruto's actual hand, but it rose from his hand slowly and jerkily. Leaning closer, Hiruzen studied the strange charka hand and saw that it differed from a typical hand in a few ways. The fingertips were sharp, and there appeared to be no knuckle or wrist. Though the Uzumaki clan was well known, not much was known about them outside of their skill with Kenjutsu and Fuinjutsu, so he shifted through his limited knowledge while humming in his mind. This was because, in the time of the Warring clans, they had established themselves on an island remote from the main land. As a result, their exposure to the main land was restricted to missions. The Uzumaki clan was extremely secretive, but not in a bad way. They kept to themselves and wished others would follow suit. Hiruzen wasn't sure whether they were protecting secrets or if they had just grown accustomed to being alone and didn't want to be bothered. His theory that only females in the Uzumaki clan possessed the chakra manipulation Kekkei Genkai was debased if Naruto's chakra arm turned out to be a variation of Kushina's chakra chains, based on what he knew and could safely assume. However, the fact that he had never witnessed a male Uzumaki using the mystical chains served as the foundation for that theory. In the event that Kushina passed away, Hiruzen wished he could read the few scrolls she had left for her son. He was only able to speculate about their contents because they were stamped with the official Uzumaki seal. Since he didn't know what the scrolls contained, he didn't want to risk Naruto learning something he shouldn't or wasn't prepared for, so he was waiting for him to grow up or become a chunin. Ultimately, he was only able to speculate as to the origin of Naruto's new power and had no idea whether it was a brand new Kekkei Genkai, a variant of Kushina's chakra chains, or perhaps an Uzumaki clan secret. Most amazing Naruto-kun, a truly impressive ability. Hiruzen praised the boy with a proud smile, his face showing no signs of doubt or inquiry. He wasn't lying either. The Kekkei Genkai had enormous potential that he could only speculate about. Hiruzen could clearly see the boy's enormous smile consuming his face despite the mask. In an attempt to win his praise, Naruto turned to face his older brother, who gave him a pat on the head and a smile. Trying to think of the best way to train an unknown Kekkei Genkai, Kakashi said, "It seems like it'll be really useful. We'll add it on your list of things to train." Hiruzen went on, "Now, tell me how you discovered this ability," he said in a kind tone as Naruto grinned at the compliments and the excitement of the training. Determining the cause might provide insight into Naruto's origin. Naruto paused, remembering Kuretsuchi's description of the animosity between Iwa and Konoha. He didn't despise them, but he wasn't sure if Gigi and the others did. But in the end, his innocent childlikeness prevailed, and he spoke the truth without mentioning their friendship. He was experimenting. "I'm not sure how it happened, but I got really mad and the arm came out. I used it to grab her, I broke her leg on accident, and pulled her out of the way when I was running in the cave, and Kuretsuchi, the ninja that I fought, tripped and was going to get crushed," he explained, shrugging slightly, though his eyes were a little tired of their reactions. Suddenly, Hiruzen had a strong desire to smoke. The granddaughter of the head of the country they might be at war with had been saved by Naruto. This had the potential to be both beneficial and detrimental. Iwa might be slightly less inclined to march the warpath as a result, but if they did, Naruto gave them more time to sharpen a potentially lethal kunai. Like Naruto, Kuretsuchi was a prodigy, and if the ancient fossil chose to teach her how to release dust. The idea made Hiruzen shudder, and that wasn't the only problem. An enemy ninja had been saved by Naruto. For a shinobi, That was a terrible and potentially fatal habit, even though it had the great marking of a person. With a sigh, he turned to face Naruto, who was staring at him with fatigue, and suppressed a deeper sigh. It appears that Naruto was aware of the tense relationship between Iwa and Konoha and knew what he had done. Hiruzen said solemnly, "Naruto-kun, I am proud of you for saving a life, immensely proud, however, you shouldn't have done so." He made the decision to eliminate the cause of the issue that led Naruto to save the enemy shinobi. Later on, it will be possible to deal with the issue of saving what amounts to royalty. Before Naruto could say anything, Hiruzen went on. His eyes narrowed, anger flashing through them. Hiruzen tried to explain his ideas in a way that Naruto could comprehend. "You did a very good thing by saving a life, something everyone should do if given the chance, but Naruto, you saved an enemy shinobi. Saving a life is commendable, but saving an enemy is foolish," he said. Indeed, he was proud of Naruto for his kindness and selflessness in saving someone right away without thinking about the consequences or himself. But in the world of shinobi, he would be killed for doing that. His enemies might be appreciative, but that wouldn't stop them from stabbing him in the back. He couldn't be so innocent and kind that he saved them. Hiruzen had to rid Naruto of this loving mindset, as much as he wished he didn't. He wanted the boy to remain the Sumaya kind and unselfish, but he couldn't afford to have Naruto act that way while on a mission or in combat. Losing Naruto would be disastrous because Konoha was just beginning to stabilize. Why shouldn't Naruto save someone? He grinds his teeth. Shouldn't he utilize his incredible power to assist others? Did the fact that they came from a different village matter? Naruto didn't even like the idea of abandoning someone to perish. When Hiruzen saw the rage and defiance roar in Naruto's eyes, he sighed but remained silent. He didn't anticipate that the boy would immediately agree with him. He turned to look at Kakashi, who had a melancholy sparkle in his eye, and the silver-haired man nodded subtly. He would assist Naruto in becoming aware of the idea that kindness is not appropriate in combat. Hiruzen said, "I expect a detailed report from all of you." Now, everyone is dismissed, and everyone departed, leaving him to think alone. Hiruzen felt a twinge of guilt when he saw the photo of his later successor. "I'm sorry, Minato-kun, but this is for the greater good," he thought, hoping the man would pardon him in the afterlife. No, Akito was bored. He was so bored. If there was a prize for being the world's most bored person, he wasn't just a candidate, he won multiple times. The foul-mouthed teenager was lying on a hospital bed at the moment, with a solid cast covering his upper body, bandages covering his face, and an eye patch covering one eye. One of his legs was free, but the other was in a cast. He would normally try to get out, as he always did when he was in the hospital, but this time he didn't even bother. He just could not get far enough from the hospital or manage to get off a full body cast. Not to mention the retrieval teams that were prepared at the hospital. He wasn't the only ninja, apparently, who detested being in the hospital. "I'm Su Bori Edd," Akito moaned loudly, kicking his only healthy leg to accentuate his groan. There was nothing to do. He was immobile and could only take the morphine for so long. After the first hour, he had grown bored of staring at the white ceiling for what felt like an eternity and a half. From the other side of the room, Suzuki remarked, "I heard you the first 10 times. I know you're bored, Akito." Her right arm was in a cast that was in a sling, and her head was wrapped in bandages, making her appear far less like a mummy than Akito. One leg was bare and the other was propped up at an angle. "Well, you're going to hear it again. I am effing bored," he screamed, kicking the bed wildly and creating a commotion. Suzuki just sighed and returned to her book, trying to ignore the preteen's yelling and fidgeting. Like all the girls in Konoha, she had a crush on the Yellow Flash, the subject of her book. But now she just read about the man's many accomplishments and had a great deal of respect for him. Her friend had given her the book as a get-well gift, one of many that she had received from her numerous friends, co-workers, and potential suitors. Stuffed animals, chocolates, and flowers filled her side of the room. But Akito's side was next to bare, as Suzuki saw. The only get-well presents he had received were a stuffed bear from an unidentified girl and a book called The Tale of a Gusty Ninja, which Naruto had given him because it was reportedly his favorite book. As you can imagine, Suzuki was very curious about this girl's identity. She turned the page, then said, softly but loudly enough for Akito to hear, "Maybe you should get that girl to entertain you." Her sly smile made Akito flush before he yelled profanities. Still with a slight flush around the bridge of his nose, Akito exclaimed, "You're still going on about that? She's a friend. She helped me when I was younger and we stayed in touch." Suzuki smiled at him sweetly and said, "Oh, how often do you two keep in touch," with air quotes almost palpable in her words. When Akito started spluttering again, Suzuki laughed. It was funny to watch the obnoxious teenager become so agitated over his apparent crush. Akito shouted, "You are so lucky that I'm tied down," his threat evident in his voice, but it had the opposite effect. "I bet you're used to being tied down," Suzuki said with a peeverly giggle, and then she winked at him. Akito blushed and stammered curses once more, which made Suzuki smile adoringly. Although it might seem strange, Suzuki was only making fun of sex with a preteen because she didn't know how else to get a response from him besides using vinegar and pee. Although she was aware that the boy had more to him, she was unsure of how to reveal it. All joking aside, "Who is she?" Suzuki asked earnestly after Akito finally calmed down, though he continued to mutter curses. After being made fun of, Akito reconsidered whether he truly wanted to tell her, but he eventually gave in. Suzuki could tell that was a lie right away. "We ain't friends, but I see her every once in a while," he concluded with a failed shrug. "I got into a scrape a few years back and she patched me up. Her names are Hanaka. She works as a clerk in the market district. I don't know the name of the place," he said. He was unaware of his own contradiction. "And does she know about your crush on her?" Suzuki said, nodding, her playful tone gone. As Suzuki bit her lip in contemplation, Akito shook his head. "You never know what might happen on a mission. Our last one is a pretty good example of that," Suzuki said, gesturing to the two of them. "Akito, you should tell her. You don't want to go out with any regrets or loose ends," Suzuki said gravely. Shinobi had an extremely busy life, and they never knew when they would be sent on a mission or whether they would return from there. Hell, given the stunt those Iwanin had pulled, they might be heading to war. "I know that crap. But I don't think someone like me would be a good match-up for someone like her. At best she sees me as some brother or something," Akito said dismissively, biting his tongue as a dejected expression crossed his face. "Someone like you," Suzuki said, raising an eyebrow in an attempt to get Akito to talk more about himself. This was the first time she had a genuine opportunity to observe the inner workings of the entity known as Akito. "You know, a smart ass, jerk, potty mouth. Killer," Akito began in a loud, sarcastic tone, but the final one was barely audible above a whisper. He sighed dramatically and rolled his eyes for effect. But when Suzuki heard it, he sighed quietly. It appears that Akito was much less comfortable killing than she had first believed. She chastised herself for her foolishness while glancing at the child. She was aware of his prior killings, they were documented in his filia, but how could she have believed that they had no impact on him? To whom could he speak? A counselor? She was only wearing an apron when she strolled through the market district and saw Akito sitting in a therapist's office. After a moment of quiet, there was a sharp intake of breath and the sound of jingling metal. As she pulled her leg out of its sling and limped to the chair beside him, Akito turned to face his sensei, perplexed. Although she wasn't a licensed therapist, she dabbled in psychology and said she could help Akito deal with some of the messier feelings he must be experiencing. "Tell me about it," she said. Despite putting on a tough exterior, Akito must be feeling insecure in his heart given his behavior. His bad breath, the traditional method of keeping people at arm's length, his arrogance, a fictitious persona to conceal his fears. Akito was a prime example of a young person who had a troubled past but was too scared to confront it. Akito shot her an absurd glance, but Suzuki went on before he could respond. "Akito, you don't know this, but I consider my team family. You, Levi, Hana, and even Naruto. I didn't have much of a family when I was a kid, and I don't plan on having kids anytime soon, so I kinda think of you four as my children. I know that probably sounds weird to you, but know this." She grasped Akito's hand and gave it a grasp. "You four can come to me about anything and everything. I won't judge you nor will I mock you, and I'll do everything in my power to help. I promise you that," Suzuki said with an angry voice. With a flurry of emotions swirling inside of him, Akito gazed at Suzuki as though she had grown a second head. Surprise, astonishment, delight, mistrust, contentment, denial, and a lot more. He was caught completely off guard and was momentarily at a loss for words. How could he respond? He has pushed people away and been derided by those around him his entire life. With a few strangers' assistance, he lived his entire life alone, and now this woman claims to see him as her child? How could he have responded to that? Was his astute response, but Suzuki gave him a small smile and said, "Don't worry, I know that's a lot to take in," to which he nodded foolishly. "Since you can't read it because of your arms and eye, I'll do it for you," Suzuki said softly, grabbing Naruto's get-well gift instead of returning to her bed. "Who knows, we might get a few training ideas from it once when get out of here," she said. A tiny smile tugged at Akito's lips as he paused, thinking that no one had ever read to him before. "Fine jugs. If you insist," he said, making Suzuki frown, but before she could say anything, a voice cut her off. "I'm afraid. Training won't be an option. With his hands in his pockets and his mind focused on his thoughts, Naruto strolled through the streets of Konoha. He and a group of his clones had just dropped Kakashi.ni off at the hospital. He could now see why the Iwa Nin had attacked them, knowing that his Ni-san was a pupil of the 4th Hokage. If he saw someone who had learned from the person who had harmed his beloved people, he didn't think he could stop himself. Thus, while Kakashi was injured, Naruto provided him with a full escort because he was tired of assassins. Naruto would have stayed, but his Ni-san insisted that he was okay, and Naruto detested hospitals. He had several things on his mind at the moment. The connection between Konoha and Iwa. His connection to Kakashi. What was his strange talent, among other things. He was still a little upset and disappointed in Gigi for telling him that he shouldn't save someone when he could. Although he recognized that ninjas had to kill, surely they weren't required to kill every opponent? They lived in a bloodthirsty world, but surely there was space for mercy. Saving Kuretsuchi was not something Naruto regretted. Now that she was his friend, he would stand by her no matter what, just as he would with all of his friends. In addition, he was considering his relationship with his Ni-san. It was shocking for Naruto to learn that Kakashi had been a pupil of the 4th. He had initially been persuaded that Kakashi was the most awesome ninja ever and such. But the more time he had to reflect, the more gloomy thoughts filled his head. The man who sealed the Kyuubi inside of him was Kakashi Hitaki's pupil. What was meant by that? Was Kakashi merely posing as his brother in order to monitor the creature that murdered his sensei? Despite his best efforts to ignore them, Naruto couldn't help but have doubts about his big brother. The likelihood was just too great to be disregarded. If you keep looking that serious, then you're going to get all wrinkly years too early, a familiar voice said, interrupting Naruto's thoughts. Naruto turned and saw Anko grinning at him. She had streaks of oil and grime on her face and was wearing her Chunin vest, which was unzipped and exposed a dangerous amount of cleavage. She had just returned from the mission she had been on while they were away, Naruto surmised. "Nay, Chan!" exclaimed Naruto, nearly leaping at his sister figure. As she whirled Naruto in the air, Anko exclaimed with delight, "Naru! Chan!" And then she saw Naruto's mask. She had only ever seen Naruto's back, so she hadn't noticed it before, but she would be able to tell Naruto's thought process from anywhere. Oh, she thought, I guess Kakashi is trying to get Naruto to mimic him as well. I thought I only had to worry about Guy. She sighed slightly. She thought absently that Naruto was wearing fishnets, but she quickly threw the thought from her mind. When Naruto grew up, he was only going to be a spectator. Wearing fishnets would not benefit anyone but the fangirls. Naruto asked, "So, how was your mission?" after Anko placed him on the ground, but Anko did not respond. The voice of a woman behind Anko said, "It went rather well though, Anko. Chan was worrying about you the entire time." The woman was Kurenai Yuhi, a Chunin who was in the running to be the most attractive woman in Konoha, right up there with Anko and Suzuki. Unexpectedly, Naruto's eyes briefly became sad, but before either woman could respond, he called out, "Hey Kurenai," in his usual upbeat manner. Shortly after meeting Anko, he had met Kurenai. However, it had only happened a few times. Given that she was Anko's friend before he was, Naruto found the woman to be pleasant. "Where are you two going?" Naruto asked, glancing at the two. Usually, when they got together, they did something enjoyable. This time, it was Anko who responded. "We're going to the bathhouse," she said, and Kurenai nodded. Kurenai muttered, "I haven't had a proper bath in at least 3 days," as she became acutely conscious of the filth and grease that covered her. Anko abruptly picked him up and threw him on her shoulders. "How about you come with us, Naru? Chan. I need someone to wash my back," she said with a giggle before Naruto could respond that he would see them later and go off to think. Given their knowledge of Naruto's ties to the bathhouse, neither of them paid attention to Kurenai's quivering eyebrow. Anko slipped into the steaming water and said, "Ah, now this is more like it," joining Kurenai, who appeared to be as joyful as she was. Naruto was happily blowing bubbles while seated in her lap. Otherwise, his head would dip below the water. Looking down at the boy she was holding, Anko said, "So Naru. Chan, how did your first C rank go?" Since she and Kurenai had been away for 5 days, they were unaware of Team 13's current situation. He casually explained, "It was bumped up to an A rank since we fought a bunch of Iwa ninja. Suzuki, Akito, and Kakashi.ni are all in the hospital while Levy's with his clan," before he started blowing bubbles again. As the two women took in what Naruto had said, there was a brief period of complete silence. Whoa, whoa. Back up. A rank? Iwa ninja? Hospital? What the hell happened? Demanded Anko, who was the first to gather herself. He jerked when he remembered something. Oh, I fought off a whole genin team by myself. Naruto turned around and said, when we were escorting Mizaki we ran into a bunch of Iwa ninja. They wanted to kill Kakashi.ni since he's the 4th student and we fought. Anko exclaimed, I repeat. Whoa, what? A whole genin team? The fact that Kakashi was in the hospital and Naruto had been in imminent danger did not fully register. With a sigh, Naruto began his story, describing the who, what, how, when, and where. After speaking with the Hokage, he realized that there was a lot of animosity between the two villages and decided to keep his friendship with Kuretsuchi a secret. Kurenai and Anko listened intently, focusing on Naruto. They were aware that something had occurred between Iwa and Konoha, but they were unaware that Naruto was a party to it. There was a thick silence after Naruto concluded his story. Anko bit her lip and thought, so, Naruto and the gang managed to take out a total genin team and 2 jonin. Given that the attack was unprovoked, Konoha may have been the one to declare war, and Iwa had gone to war over less. Naruto, on the other hand, was blissfully oblivious to their thoughts since he had resumed blowing bubbles, but he stopped when he recalled another forgotten detail. He neglected to demonstrate his new talent to Anko. He spun around once more, his hand poised to demonstrate his skill, but before he could say anything, his gaze was drawn to an odd sight. In stark contrast to her creamy white skin, a thick black mark was visible on the left side of his Chan's neck. What is that? As he rose on his Chan's legs, Naruto pondered. Anko was initially perplexed, but she soon recognized what Naruto had seen. She stiffened but did not try to move, her gaze fixed on Naruto as he rapidly identified the mark. It was a seal, and Naruto was perplexed. Was Anko a Jinchuriki like him? Then, apart from training, he could only think of one reason Anko would have a seal on her, and it most definitely didn't appear to be a resistance seal. The seal was incredibly simple yet ridiculously intricate. What little Naruto could see was that the seal functioned as a chakra amplifier while also having the properties of a storage seal and a filter. No, it wasn't a filter. He didn't know what the seal spread, but it was the exact opposite. Then it was surrounded by an entirely different seal. Although Naruto was unable to identify its function, he knew it was a level 7 barrier seal. Nay, Chanwa, Anko interrupted Naruto as she draped her hand over the mark. It was a farewell gift from my sensei. Anko spit out his venomous words. As she remembered the man she had once admired, her eyes darkened with rage and anger. Her sensei. Naruto cocked his head in perplexity. Why did she sound so irate, and why would he leave her with a mark like that? Anko hesitated to respond when she noticed Naruto was perplexed and wanted an explanation. She was unsure of Naruto's reaction upon discovering her past. After years of prejudice, she was reluctant to disclose her past, but she didn't think it would change his opinion of her. If Kurenai hadn't nodded, she wouldn't have responded to him. If it weren't for her best friend's encouragement, she would have simply laughed it off and moved on. So she told him. She told him everything, including how she had been abandoned during the Third War, how Orochimaru had raised her, how she looked up to him, how he had deceived her about going on a training trip, and finally how he had cursed her and abandoned her like trash. She finished the story with a dry throat, but she was unsure of how long it took. She and Kurenai now awaited Naruto's response. A moment later, they received it, and it wasn't what they had anticipated. Neither Kurenai nor Anko had ever witnessed Naruto exhibit such an emotion. Unadulterated, unrestrained anger and rage that is pure. With a killing intent so strong that civilians would have undoubtedly fainted if they had been around, Naruto's body shook with rage. Naruto's fists were clenched, and blood seeped between his fingers. Kurenai and Anko watched Naruto dumbfounded, unsure of what to do. Neither had ever witnessed Naruto so enraged, much less so intensely. With a fierce whisper, Naruto said, I won't forgive him. Then he looked up and his eyes were filled with anger. I will never forgive him. I promise you, Chan. I'm gonna erase that mark and I'm going to kick Orochimaru's ass. Naruto vowed, his eyes filled with resolve and conviction. Anko was overcome with shock since all she could do was look at the boy, her expression showing how she felt. Slowly but surely, though, her astonishment gave way to a smile and a loving expression. When Naruto learned that one of his valued people had been harmed, this was his response. As the boy gazed at her with unblinking eyes, Anko felt her love for him grow. Even after being informed that the curse mark could not be removed, she was confident that he would do it. Uzumaki Naruto was the only person in the world capable of doing it. Never a fan of mushy atmospheres, Anko gave a quick, mincing smile and said, Oh, so your cute little butt is going to beat one of the Sannin? Before reaching up and pinching the adorable butt. When Anko's evil cackling and Naruto's girlish yelp were heard, the tense and mushy atmosphere instantly disappeared. Enko sung, "Oh my, your butt is so pinch," Abel, while pursuing the escaping boy. As he swam away, Naruto shouted, N.Ne, Chan, and totally forgot that he could walk on water. Kurenai calmly drank her tea while laughing at the scene and the obvious sexual harassment, taking pleasure in seeing a devoted family. As his son presented the mission report, Onoki's cup broke in his hand. "We lost 3 genin?" he yelled, his tiny body trembling with rage. "And Rakan along with Iru?" he asked, receiving a firm nod from his son. It had been a disastrous mission. 3 genin, 2 jonin, someone who fervently desired to pass on a Kekkei Genkei. He gritted his teeth and fought the impulse to dust release all of his knowledge. He was unable to accomplish that at this time because there were too many issues and questions that needed to be resolved. "Why in the sage's name did you attack them? Did it not occur to you that this could mean war?" asked he. Wincing at his father's angry yell, Kitsuchi reported, "Tsuchikage Sama, from what I gathered, Rakan and Eru's judgment was clouded by the presence of Hitaki Kakashi. Of course they would toss away judgment when that bloody copycat was there," he grumbled. "Having his ninja alive is far more important to him than Kakashi dying." "Continue with your report," Onoki muttered after rubbing his eyes with the palms of his hands and letting out a sigh as an S-rank headache began to form. Then Kitsuchi stepped back and his daughter took the stage. "That concludes what I have seen. I give the floor to Kuretsuchi," Kitsuchi said. She gave a detailed account of their fight before going into detail about what happened in the cave. She started off by describing Naruto, who surprised everyone with his age and skill. Knowing the response she would have received, she omitted their friendship. He ignored her angry yell, "Because whatever he did broke your leg and the two of you temporarily teamed up before going your separate ways." Onoki listened, taking in every detail, and remained silent until she was done. "So, you fought against a child prodigy, who's younger than you yet managed to fight the 3 of you. Then you were rescued by said boy in a way unknown. Then you were carried," he said. He concluded, "Am I missing anything?" This was Kuretsuchi's final genuine opportunity to share her friendship with Naruto, so she paused. If she did it now, it would be okay, but if it slipped out later, there would be hell to pay. Besides, she didn't really owe him anything. 5 of them had been killed by his team. 5 of her fellows had perished. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't deny that she had been a little delighted when Naruto leapt with delight when she announced that she would be his friend. How he helped her a lot and how he was one of the few friends she had ever had. However, he was also the reason behind her allies' deaths. They could have jumped in if he hadn't separated them, since they would have realized they were in trouble. Thus, Kuretsuchi was unsure of her feelings for Naruto at the time. Was he the bastard who unintentionally led to the deaths of her allies, or was he still her friend? Until she saw him again, she would remain in the dark. Taking her silence as a rejection, Onoki started to consider the possibility that his granddaughter had been saved by a Konoha ninja. He was unsure of how to react to that. Although it was a Konoha ninja, he was undoubtedly happy that the child had saved his family. After giving it some thought, he gave himself permission to feel thankful. What was his name? Onoki inquired abruptly, curious about the identity of the youngster who had saved his granddaughter and a potential powerful ninja. Despite being a Konoha.nin, Onoki valued strength. Whoever this boy was, his name would stick in people's minds. That was what his instinct told him. When Kuretsuchi responded, "Naruto Uzumaki," her cage arched an eyebrow. "And Uzumaki?" Onoki stroked his beard and thought. He hadn't heard that name in a few years. It was once so dreaded that he assembled 3 of the greatest ninja nations to eradicate it. If anything, he was shocked that it had been so long since he had heard that name, rather than shocked that he was hearing it again. He was aware that at least some Uzumaki would have traveled to Konoha, their sister village, and that there had been some survivors of that massacre. He could not recall the name, but if his memory served him well, there had been an Uzumaki active prior to the Kyuubi attack. Was this her son? Maybe? He was old enough? In any case, this simply demonstrated that Naruto Uzumaki would grow up to be a very strong ninja. No Uzumaki had ever been weak. Only he and his son remained in the room after the other genin completed their reports and he dismissed them. "What will you do?" Kitsuchi inquired, his tone matched by a solemn expression. His father answered him with a long silence. Onoki considered carefully what he would do next. Have they declared war? Though he was unaware of their true strength, he knew Konoha wasn't as strong as they gave the impression because, given their losses, it was just not possible. They were attacked by a Biju and lost a number of S-ranked shinobi. They wouldn't be much help because their ally Suna was experiencing a recession. Iwa had lost a lot of ninja in the Third War, and the Yellow Flash had eliminated almost a third of them, so they were far from being at their strongest. Iwa would undoubtedly be destroyed if they went to war by themselves. But that might be a different story if Kumo joined them. After the Third War, Kumo never disarmed, and they never experienced a devastating defeat. Kiri would not play a role. They were engaged in a civil war that would take a long time to end. The odds were on their side, so Onoki rubbed his beard but remained silent. He had the opportunity to finally put Konoha out of his life, but he remained silent. Why? What made a man who had spent his entire life trying to outmaneuver the village concealed in the leaves hesitate? What caused a man who hated Konoha with all his heart to hesitate? He wasn't certain if he wanted to endure another conflict. He was old and worn out. He didn't think he had what it took for a fourth war, despite having already been through 3. He had had enough of seeing people's lives cut so short, of seeing bodies piled high and grieving families. He had had enough of war. But as the Tsuchikage, it was his responsibility to respond to their losses and to the families who would surely seek retribution. He understood their pleading and could not allow their cries to go unanswered. Regardless of who initiated the fight, Konoha was responsible for paying for the death of their ninja. After several minutes, there was only a deafening silence, which the Tsuchikage broke. He asked, "The Chunin exams are being held in Suna after Kumo, correct?" And his son nodded in confusion. After the Hyuga error, Onoki was already aware that Konoha would be sending a team. "We won't declare war. We'll let the Chunin exams serve their true purpose," said the elderly Tsuchikage, leaning back in his chair. Surprisingly quiet for the number of people in the office, Hiruzen's office was soon broken by the Warhawk. With a loud thump of his cane, Danzo declared, "This is a clear act of aggression. We cannot let this slide. We must take action against those that wish to harm our home." More than Hiruzen would have preferred, there were murmurs of agreement. "Are you a fool, Danzo? We are far too weak to wage war. Our feet are just now getting back under us. Do you really wish to be crippled again? Perhaps even destroyed?" Hiruzen said loudly, glaring at his former friend after learning the agreeers' faces by heart. He was already aware that Danzo would be in charge of the war party. "Do you really have so little confidence in your village?" Danzo asked, his only eye narrowing, before a blast of murderous intent struck. "I have every confidence in my village, however, I do not wish to see it destroyed. Iwa may be weak but their ally Kumo is still strong considering that they never disarmed after the Third War. We, on the other hand, are still weakened and our ally Suna is going through an economic depression. They might not even help us in favor of joining the seemingly stronger side," Hiruzen stated with calm and flat eyes. "Let us not forget that they are in possession of 4 Jinchuriki. A vast difference from our one. Not only that but theirs consist of war veterans and ours is a child," he continued. "Then let us give Kumo a bloodline or 2 as an incentive to become our ally opposed to Iwa's. Perhaps one from the minor clans. No, they wouldn't accept that. Perhaps one of the Hyuga, or Uchiha." Danzo said, apparently giving this some thought before speaking. It would be at least 4 years before Kumo could even consider using the bloodlines they provided them in combat, even though he was against giving an enemy any kind of strength. Following the destruction of Iwa, they had 4 years to rapidly regain their strength, focus on Kumo, and reclaim their bloodlines. They could do it too. If Kumo and Konoha collaborated, there would be some opportunities to subtly undermine them and set symbolic time bombs. The heads of the Hyuga and Uchiha clans combined their murderous intent to thwart his offer. Hiruzen, however, remained silent since he could see Danzo's scheme. After giving it some thought, he threw it out of his mind. Konoha did not do such a thing. They would not give up their children or their comrades in order to obtain an advantage. With a sense of finality, Hiruzen said, "No, we will do no such thing," before getting to his feet. "We will not declare war. Such a thing would ruin us at this time. Regardless if Kumo or Suna participate. We may bring Iwa down but they will surely take us down with them. We have too much to lose and too little to gain by waging a war," he said in a commanding tone, and he was followed by mutters of agreement. "We may have no choice in the matter. Iwa has declared war for much less. I believe we should take necessary precautions and arm ourselves accordingly in case of war," Fagaku said gravely, bringing up an important point. "I agree, however, if we were to arm ourselves now it could provoke Iwa or Kumo into declaring war," Shikao Nara said in a rough voice, nodding in agreement. After nodding, Hiruzen said, "We should open up negotiatio," but was interrupted by a loud cane stamp. The room was almost silenced when Danzo yelled, "We have been attacked. Our enemies have clearly acted in aggression. We should not ask to parley with them. Doing so will admit that we are too weak for a war." Massive amounts of murderous intent between Danzo and Hiruzen were present, along with a tense silence that pervaded the atmosphere. Their desire to kill was so strong that his secretary almost passed out when she walked in. I. H. Hokage. S. Sama, IH. Have a message from the KK's cage. She stumbled as she bowed and extended a letter. Using his sharpened wind chakra, Hiruzen took it and cut the top open. Before Sume, the leader of the Inzunka clan, broke the silence, Hiruzen hurriedly read the letter. What's it say? She inquired. Despite his racing thoughts, Hiruzen calmly stated, Iwa has requested permission to send 25 genin teams, the maximum allowed, to participate in their Chunin exam, while stroking his beard. Only when the Chunin exams were being used for their intended purpose as a stand-in for war were the greatest number of genin teams sent. Was Iwa not going to declare war as a result of this? Did Iwa truly intend to substitute the Chunin exams? Or was this just Onoki's feint? Hiruzen closed his eyes and tried to determine Onoki's true intentions by drawing on all of his knowledge and experiences with the little man. A tiny smile slowly crept onto his lips. Thus, this was the response that Onoki had developed. Remembering how broken the little man had appeared when he signed the treaty at the end of the Third War, he knew this was real. How utterly ill and miserable, after what Minato did, he wouldn't be so keen to fight in another conflict. Hiruzen allowed his respect for the Tsuchikage to slowly grow as he thought, so this is your answer and solution. His office remained silent, with everyone realizing the implications of Iwa's actions. How to respond to such a challenge, Hokage? Sama, Heishi inquired, maintaining his calm demeanor despite the tense situation. When Hiruzen said, we let the next generation answer this call. Notify all Jonin senseis, 25 of them will be attending Suna's Chunin exams and they will train their genin accordingly. I'll handpick which teams will go in the last month. There was a murmur of agreement, and even Danzo nodded in agreement. Hiruzen thought, oh no, as he suddenly realized something crucial. Recalling his wager with the ancient war hawk, he felt a chilling sense of dread. Maybe he should call off his wager with Danzo, he thought, biting his tongue. In this mess, he couldn't risk Naruto. Konoha would be permanently disabled if Naruto were killed in this battle. They would also lose their only Jinchuriki, and they would never know when a shinobi powerful enough to reseal the strongest Biju would show up. He saw a gleam of greed in Danzo's eye as their gazes locked. He couldn't cancel the bet because Danzo wouldn't let him. He had little to lose and too much to gain. Despite a sea of adversaries attempting to bring him down, Naruto was able to emerge victorious from the Chunin exams. He intended to give Kakashi the order to train Naruto to the bone. Naruto has to become a Chunin by passing this test. He would personally tutor the boy if it came to that. This is a letter requesting to send 25 genin teams as well as sending out Jinchuriki. Hiruzen wrote gravely on a slip of paper and presented it to his secretary. He gave up on his successor's forgiveness as soon as the slip of paper left his hands. Lying on his back, Akito gazed at the ceiling. Like a broken record, he kept repeating the same sentence in his mind about what he had been told that night. I'm sorry, but there is no chance of recovery. You have severe nerve damage and bone fragments circulating inside your spinal cord. Even Tusnade of the Sannin couldn't make this better. As the words sank in, Akito shed a single tear. His shinobi days were over. The Chunin exams are in 5 months. Even though Naruto's muscles ached, he disregarded their cries. He ignored the fluid that dripped from his body with each movement, even though his body was leaking perspiration like a broken faucet. With perspiration streaming down his face, Naruto muttered, 998, 999, as he swung the 100-pound training tanto in the center kata. Because the training tanto was made of lead and had a weight seal applied to it, it was solid black. With fire roaring in his eyes and the air around him, Guy screamed, Yosh, Naruto.kun. I believe in you. You can do it. Just one more Naruto. Kun, he screamed at the top of his lungs. Never wanting to be the one to let Guy down, Naruto grunted as he slowly raised his tanto. By making his body follow his instructions, he was able to raise his tanto above his head. He took a moment to collect his thoughts before lowering the tanto to its center position. Before dropping the tanto, he screamed, 1000. The lead sword made an indentation in the soft ground, and Naruto joined it a moment later by falling backwards. He tried to focus on the blue sky that hung overhead, ignoring the burning sensation in his arms. His heartbeat thumping in his ears and his rough breath were the only sounds he could hear. For a brief moment, Naruto took in the peaceful scenery, but it was cut short when Guy's enormous smile obscured his view of the sky. Guy praised Naruto.kun, his teeth gleaming, saying, Most excellent Naruto.kun. Your flames of youth are shining most brightly this afternoon. After giving his sensei a quick smile, Naruto rolled over and made himself get to his feet. Despite his fatigue, he refused to give up. He still needed to train for half a day. When Guy saw this, his smile only widened. Since his first A-ranked mission, Naruto had devoted himself fully to his training. He already had plenty of time and motivation to study more for the tests, so he didn't even need the order. Since the C rank turned A, Naruto had not embarked on any more missions. For him, it had been enlightening and his first genuine look into the world of shinobi. It was only by sheer luck that his friends survived. They had been outnumbered and outpowered and had almost perished. Naruto therefore threw himself into getting stronger so that he would be able to defend and ensure the well-being of his friends the next time hell broke out. He refused to allow any more of his valued people to suffer harm. He also needed to consider his pledge to Enko.ne. He meant it when he said that he would tear that snake to pieces for ever daring to hurt his sister figure in that way. He intended to force that jerk to plead for forgiveness before he. The thought slipped Naruto's mind. Before he what? He had never wanted to harm anyone before he killed him. Was that because he now had valuable people? Was it because his good nature was already beginning to be tainted by the shinobi's way? Yash. Now that we've completed our physical training for the day, we shall now practice your most youthful ability. Guy exclaimed, throwing a fist into the air, which Naruto mimicked, jolting him out of his reverie. This was his favorite part of training every day, he thought to himself. He was keen to learn his talent and was utterly enthralled with it. He lined up with the closest tree because he was so excited that he forgot all about his burning muscles. Today would be the day, Naruto thought as he scowled at the tree's thick trunk. He was going to make progress on his Kekkei Genkai today. Naruto inhaled deeply and peacefully, purging his thoughts of anything but mastering the chakra arms. After a few seconds, Naruto's hair was ruffled by a light breeze, indicating that it was time to go. The ligament of pure chakra appeared when Naruto thrust out his hand, and it answered his call. A sapphire blue arm leapt out of Naruto's hand and ran in the direction of the tree, its hand open and prepared to seize whatever its maker wanted. A second later, it grabbed the tree, making Naruto believe he had done it at last. After that, though, the tree exploded in a shower of splinters and fell with a loud crash. With a groan and a release of the chakra arm, Naruto muttered in disappointment, "I broke the tree again." He had been so certain that this time he would succeed. Naruto was training to master the chakra hand's power, but he was failing miserably. Like a toothpick, he was trying to grasp a tree without breaking it, then lift the tree out of the ground without breaking the massive oak. Guy noted that the chakra arm was very powerful, and they intended to subdue it. They had attempted to practice on rocks, which were harder than trees, but they had run out of large enough rocks. Naruto's Kekkei Genkai training was meticulously planned by Guy. After mastering its significant strength, they would work on fine-tuning it for tasks like dishwashing and egg catching. They would then try to see if Naruto could use his chakra to create other things. They were aware that Naruto could create a leg out of chakra, but could he do so? A head? An entire body? The potential of Naruto's abilities in combat was incredible if he could. There were so many potential uses for it that Guy was at a loss for ideas. Naruto was already proficient in several areas. In addition to making the chakra arm as long as he desired, he could make it as wide, thin, large, or small as he desired. That was somewhat constrained, though, as the chakra arm became less tangible when Naruto lost sight of it. They deduced that in order for the chakra to be useful, Naruto had to concentrate on its solidity and shape, otherwise, it would vanish. A normal person would find that burdensome because you can't concentrate on just one thing during a fight, but Naruto proved that to be untrue. His Uzumaki brain was the reason. They all had brains that were fundamentally different from theirs. They could give 100 things their full attention. They could devote themselves entirely to 100 different things. Although no one knew why the Uzumaki brain was so different, it was generally assumed that it was the reason they were so skilled at Fuinjutsu. Imagine what they could accomplish if they concentrated on just one thing. If you could accomplish 100 different tasks just as well if you did them all at once. When a blue arm reappeared from Naruto's palm, Guy was startled out of his reverie, but he chose to examine Naruto rather than concentrate on the chakra mass. For the past month, the boy had been unrelenting. He trained every day until he passed out. Although there were no indications that the boy was getting sick, Guy was starting to worry about his health. He didn't exhibit any symptoms of a fever or overwork fatigue. He was in the clearing every single day, training with whoever he was training with that day, and he was as ambitious as ever. Even though he was hesitant to refer to him as such, Naruto lost a friend and teammate, so maybe that was to be expected. Guy nearly missed it when the tree didn't explode upon contact because he was so preoccupied with Naruto. He marveled as the chakra arm seized the tree, Naruto being extremely cautious not to damage it, and then the arm started to pull upward. Guy could hear the groan of the roots as they tried, but failed, to hide beneath the ground. The tree emerged from the ground inch by inch, and just when Guy believed Naruto might have done it at last, the tree exploded. God fuck. Before Naruto could vent his rage, Guy interrupted, saying, Naruto.kun. You shouldn't use such unyouthful words. And you have nothing to be angry about. It was a magnificent try, he said, giving the boy a supportive thumbs up. Even though he continued to mutter profanities under his breath, it was enough to calm the boy down because he returned to his stance and prepared for another attempt. This time, I'll definitely do it. The Chunin exams are 4 months away. Asuma walked down the street, releasing a cloud of smoke. He had always liked to smoke, a habit he inherited from his father, but he wasn't smoking to kill time now. No, his nervousness was the reason he was smoking. He had recently been told to train Naruto Uzumaki's wind affinity, the same child who believed he detested him due to a miscommunication. Normally, he wouldn't care if a child didn't like him, but Naruto was an exception. According to what he had heard about the boy, he was very likable and a shining example of purity and selflessness. Well, that was a stretch, but he did want to mend their relationship. He had a friendship with Kakashi, but more significantly, Naruto was Kurenai's best friend's younger brother. With just a few words, Naruto could destroy any chance he had with Kurenai. With the intention of making amends with the child and getting the brat to sing his praises, Asuma dismissed the idea and went into training ground 7. His sixth sense alerted him to trouble as soon as his foot stepped through the training ground's threshold, and he reflexively leapt back. The ground the person had stepped on was punctured by a handful of kunai at the exact moment. After waiting for a few seconds for the onslaught to stop, he approached the area where the kunai was lying. At that moment, he saw a thread leading to a branch, and he rapidly identified the trap. The branch would swing out as a result of the thread breaking, which would then throw the ninja tools. Simple and unremarkable, yet effective against unwary adversaries. Asuma gave a loud hum. What was it? Was it a training aid, or was there an enemy lurking nearby? Because of its lack of complexity, he didn't think it was the first, so the second was left. Before venturing into the forest, he pulled out his battle knives in case he needed them. Even though the walk took only 5 minutes, the sheer number of traps that were scattered throughout the forest until the clearing made it take much longer. Bear traps, smoke and paint bombs, kunai traps, holes with stakes at the bottom, and more were all around him. Just when he thought he was safe, a dozen more traps would appear. He arrived at the clearing, looking only a little worse for wear, and discovered what had caused his difficult journey. As he reached the middle of the clearing, he noticed Anko's and Naruto's smiling faces. Dread crept up on Asuma, who hoped Naruto hadn't spoken before he had a chance to correct their miscommunication. Anko would kill Kurenai, so screw him for not being able to date him. With a slightly too sweet smile, Anko said, not too shabby, Mr. Guardian. However, you made a couple mistakes on your way here. Naru-chan, what were they? The most glaring one was he continued to walk on the path when it was obviously littered with traps. He also chose to stay on the ground rather than go to the treetops, where there was a chance of less traps. He also seemed overconfident in his ability to take what was dished out, immediately responded Naruto. Asuma blushed slightly. Being nitpicked by a child was just plain awkward. Exactly right, Naru-chan, exactly right, Anko said, nodding and giving Naruto a congratulatory pat on the head before turning to face Asuma. I'll be sticking around for your lesson. We wouldn't want an accidents with killing intent. Would we? Anko sent a blast at Asuma with a sweet tone. The black-haired man strategically avoided the snake mistress's eyes while coughing into his hand. The instant he did, his fate would be decided. Naruto had explained the incident to Anko a few months prior, and based on the conversations between Anko and Kurenai and Kakashi and Guy, he had been able to determine Asuma's identity. Anko had been incensed when she learned about it, but after Naruto calmed her down, she understood that Asuma wasn't the kind of person who would despise Naruto for his possessions. It must have been an accident, then. Asuma whispered, why? Yeah, wouldn't want that, and the intention to kill vanished. Anko watched the two with a stick of dango in her hand and a cup of tea as she walked off to a nearby tree and sat in one of the branches. In an attempt to improve Naruto's perception of him, Asuma cracked his neck and clapped his hands together. All right, then, he said, since I didn't get to introduce myself last time we met, I'm Sarutobi Asuma, Jonin of Konoha, and until recently I was one of the 12 ninja guardians. A blank glare returned his smile. As you know, I'm going to be helping you train your wind affinity since I'm the only other wind user in Konoha. What a tough nut to crack, Asuma thought before continuing. Well, that wasn't totally accurate. Danzo was always there, but that presented its own set of challenges. Naruto's eyes glowed with curiosity. Do you know anything about elemental affinities, or should I start from the beginning? Asuma asked, smirking in his head, after noticing it and successfully persuaded Naruto to speak. Fire is strong against wind but is weak against water. Wind is strong against lighting but weak against fire. Lighting is strong against earth but weak against wind. Earth is strong against water but weak against lighting, and, lastly, water is strong against fire but weak against earth. Naruto responded prior to stating, I have a wind and a minor lighting affinity, but I developed an affinity with fire. With a praising nod, Asuma said, exactly right. Now, can you tell me what it means exactly to have an affinity with one element? In an attempt to gain a better understanding of Naruto's current situation. After pausing briefly, Naruto stated, it makes using the jutsu you have an affinity with easier and take less chakra, but the stronger affinity you have for an element, the harder it is to use jutsu that are strong against it, to which Asuma nodded once more. Exactly, while it isn't impossible, it's just more difficult. You're actually lucky in that regard. Since you have a natural affinity with lighting, it cancels out that effect, he stated before raising his hands again. Alright, you have the basics down, now, on to the good stuff, he stated. You probably already know this, but wind is the strongest element for close to mid-range fights. It's incredibly versatile and I'm going to be teaching you how to master this element. The first step is to cut this with nothing other than your chakra, he said, picking up a leaf from the ground. The trick is to imagine your chakra rubbing against each other, sharpening each other. The finer the line, the sharper the cut, he added after thinking for a moment. He wasn't going to wait for Naruto to ask him for advice or figure it out on his own. If Anko believed he was being lenient with her younger brother, he could only imagine the horrors she would unleash. Asuma was greatly surprised when Naruto nodded and, with a cross of his fingers, 50 copies appeared all around him. Following his most recent mission, Kakashi had increased his threshold. As it became increasingly clear that the shadow clones had no actual negative effects, he was also loosening the restrictions. Knowing what they were supposed to do, each clone picked up a leaf and started trying to cut it. While waiting for Naruto to remark on his lack of success, Asuma lit another cigarette. But an hour later, one of Naruto's clones shouted and showed off what it had done. It had successfully severed almost 1/4 of the leaf. Asuma and Anko exchanged a startled glance, both of them astonished that Naruto was already experiencing success. The majority of that time was spent getting started, but most ninja took a few weeks to master the first step. An additional hour later, Naruto threw aside his clones. Despite his slight headache, which made him wince, he picked up a leaf, held it between his two hands, and concentrated. He opened his hands to check if he had succeeded after sensing a change in the leaf a second later. He had. They sliced the leaf in two. It didn't matter that the cut was a little jagged. Asuma blew a low whistle, and Naruto cheered. Although he was still angry that his father had turned Naruto into a weapon, the boy was obviously a top-tier prodigy. He might even make Kakashi and Itachi seem like idiots. With a sing-song voice, Naruto chanted, I did it, I did it, I did it, I did it, while he carried the split leaf about triumphantly. Anko and Asuma both smiled at what they saw. Even though he was a ninja, a prodigy, and even a Jinchuriki, he was still a child at heart. Alright, I'm impressed. But will you be able to handle the next step? The Chunin exams are in 3 months. Naruto exclaimed with excitement, I'm getting another teacher. And Kakashi nodded. As if called, Hayate emerged into the clearing. Yeah, his name's Hayate Gecko and he's going to help you develop your kenjutsu style. You have a great base and idea, but it needs polishing and he's just the guy to do it, Kakashi said. The sickly man approached. He was a special Jonin of Kakashi's age, but it was unexpected given that he appeared to be just a breath away from passing away. For as long as Kakashi had known him, Hayate had been ill, but he was also unaware of a superior kenjutsu expert. With a blade, the man was capable of both beautiful and terrifying feats. He coughed to punctuate his words. Hello. I'm Hayate Gecko. I'm here to help you with kenjutsu, he said. With a suspicious look on his face, Naruto glanced at Kakashi before turning back to Hayate. He said, I'm Uzumaki Naruto, with a smile, and Hayate nodded. He began by saying, it's a pleasure. Now, I understand that you've developed your own kenjutsu style, as he was quite taken by Naruto's style. Kushina Uzumaki was Naruto's sensei, and the Uzumaki family was already well known for their kenjutsu skills. Whatever Naruto had produced, he was sure would be worth seeing. Hayate produced his own training katana as Naruto nodded and retrieved his blunted tanto, which he used for training. They started sparring a moment later. Hayate experimented with the offensive but stayed on the defensive, He wasn't dissatisfied with what he saw because he wanted to see Naruto's style from both sides. Naruto had a very straightforward yet incredibly powerful style. Although it moved quickly, it remained faithful to the conventional application of circular momentum. Furthermore, the element of surprise could be applied in a variety of ways. Do you believe he was aiming for an overhanded right swing? No, slash from the left side. Only people with extremely fast reflexes or instincts would be able to handle his lethal kenjutsu style once he perfected it. He saw some weaknesses in his defense, but it was equally strong. It had little ability to block a slash and appeared to rely too heavily on an opponent thrusting. Hayate ended their little altercation. He saw the style's advantages and disadvantages, as well as everything he needed to see. With a tone of smugness, Naruto asked proudly, "So, what do you think?" He knew he created his own style, which was amazing. It's very impressive. The basic idea is ingenious, however, there are a few things that need to be altered, Hayate said, coughing into his hand while pretending to laugh. Naruto scowled at him. Normally, Naruto was receptive to suggestions, however, he struggled to handle criticism of his own methods. After noticing this, Hayate pushed forward, saying, "Your offense was very good, but once someone gets the hang of it, it becomes very predictable." Naruto nodded as he began, "Your defense was good, but it's very open to slashes. That was the most glaring weakness I saw. Only once had Kuretsuchi been able to accomplish that he would take. I would recommend stationing your blade in a way that they can be deflected overhead and for your offensive." Hayate smirked after coughing. "It needs to become more unpredictable. You could do this by adding the number of spins and eliminating the pop that is heard before you spin. Even if the enemy can't tell where your blade is coming from, they might be able to dodge because of that warning." He then coughed up a little storm. Naruto gave a gentle nod. The counsel was sound. He knew Hayate knew what he was talking about because he had already planned to add more spins following his battle with Kuretsuchi. But he had no idea how to add more unpredictability to his style. He muttered to himself, "Maybe I'll use shadow clones." But Hayate overheard him and paused before a smile appeared on his face. "Did I hear you say shadow clones? The Chunin exams are in 2 months and 2 weeks. As his pen moved smoothly across the paper, creating the kanji for fire, Naruto inhaled deeply. There was not a flaw in sight as his ink flowed smoothly and without hesitation until the kanji for fire was visible on the paper. Examining his work, Naruto looked for even the smallest line or anything that seemed a little off. He smiled when he saw nothing. Since he began studying Fuinjutsu, he had improved his calligraphy skills, which were necessary for the art. With his latest book, Fuinjutsu Level 4, "You've blown yourself up at least once so far," in hand, he was happy with his work. "Don't tell lies," and started reading. Naruto was much more enthusiastic about Level 4, which dealt with a greater variety of seals. The ability to create your own seals or modify pre-existing ones was also introduced at Level 4. He was working with the complex weight and resistance seals because he didn't think he was ready for that yet. Now he was learning what lines did what, how they operated, and other things that most people found boring. But Naruto was captivated by the book. All of his thoughts were about how wonderful Fuinjutsu was as an art and how everyone should practice it, but they claimed that it lacked sufficient combat applications. Oh no! Fuinjutsu, or explosive tags, had many applications in combat. When they dismissed the magical practice of Fuinjutsu, it truly shook Naruto's gears. "I'll show them. The greatest fighting potential ever is found in Fuinjutsu." As he read his book, soaking up every bit of information, he thought. He was aware that it was a bold assertion, but could he support it? Could he truly demonstrate to the world the greatness of Fuinjutsu as an art form? A thought came to him while he was reading about the weight seal. Slowly, a menacing grin pulled at Naruto's mouth. "The Chunin exams are in 2 months. Kakashi said, "These are the hand signs," and then he made them slowly. "Snake, dragon, rabbit, tiger," he said, allowing Naruto to learn the hand signs by heart. After indicating that he had seen them with a nod, Naruto practiced the hand signs a few times, increasing in speed each time until he felt he had them mastered. He looked up expectantly at Kakashi when he did. He reached into his bag and produced a spiel of ninja wire, holding it up and saying, "You wrap it around your target," which Kakashi did by wrapping it around a nearby rock. "Then you use the jutsu from at least 20 feet away." "All right, so the technique that I'm teaching you is called fire release, dragon fire." Kakashi demonstrated by flying through the hand signs he had taught Naruto after jumping back until he was 20 feet away. Before he breathed fire on the wires, he pulled the taunt. Before racing towards the wire covered rock, the wires caught in a raging conflagration. When the wires collided on both sides, the rock quickly caught fire. Despite being so far away, Naruto could feel the heat of the flames as he watched in wonder as they ate up the rock, turning it red hot. A rock that was well on its way to turning into magma was visible when Kakashi stopped the jutsu and let the wires drop a few seconds later. "Now, you try," Kakashi said in a cheerful tone as he turned to face Naruto and gave the boy his trademark eye smile. He had just learned this technique from Itachi, and after facing Rakan, he realized he needed some more intense and concentrated fire jutsu. Before a smile appeared on his face, Naruto could only stare in wonder at the devastation the jutsu had caused. "Okay," he exclaimed before he took out his own ninja wire and began his own attempt. Naruto had to make numerous attempts before he achieved the intended outcome. Making the fire catchable enough to ignite even the metal wires and wrapping the wire around the object were the challenging parts. Although his dragon fire wasn't as strong as his knee Sans, it was still effective. Kakashi started explaining how to employ the jutsu in combat after Naruto finished. As Kakashi explained, he noticed a moment of unease and hesitation in Naruto's eyes. "This jutsu is useful in a number of ways, but the best use is the way I just showed you. If you wrap an enemy shinobi in the ninja wire and pin them to the rock, they can't escape and you incinerate them," Kakashi said. "I know you're not comfortable with the thought of killing, but you can't be afraid to. Your enemies won't hesitate to kill you, and if you do, then it's game over. You can't just tie them down and hope they stay down, Naruto. There is no room for mercy on the battlefield," he said with a sigh, but Naruto's eyes blazed with defiance. That wouldn't sit well with him. He refused to believe that he had to eliminate all of his adversaries. Why was he unable to simply restrain them? What harm could they cause if he sealed them inside a scroll? Naruto was committed to pursuing those alternatives before taking a life. Kakashi simply sighed. He knew that Naruto wouldn't alter his perspective until he had to kill someone. He merely hoped that his words would prevent him from becoming paralyzed when that moment arrived. Kakashi thought that since Naruto was already mastering his element, learning wind jutsu should be much simpler. "Okay, now I want you to demonstrate that wind jutsu I taught you last week. Have you made any more progress with it?" he asked. "Yeah, it's twice as strong as it was before," Naruto said with a nod, and then he started flying through hand signs. Wind bullet. Wind release. Before he sucked down a massive gulp of air and his chest expanded, Naruto mentally yelled, then lurched forward and let out a roar. Almost as large as he was, a compressed bullet of air shot out of his mouth and hurtled in the direction of the still glowy rock. With a loud boom, the rock broke into a million pieces as the two collided. Before he let out a loud whoop, Naruto flashed a crazy smile that was almost exactly like that of a mad bomber. With glee in his voice, Naruto exclaimed, "See? I told you, I could barely break a rock before, but now it's, like, all gone." At his younger brother's antics, Kakashi simply broke out in a cold sweat. The largely blonde boy nodded when Kakashi said, "I believe you, it's got a lot more power than last week. You've been practicing on your own?" "Good," said Kakashi with a nod of approval. Normally, since they were playing with fire and lighting, he would be against any child receiving unsupervised training. But Naruto had a good chance of becoming Chunin. Kakashi reasoned that he should give Naruto some leeway to train independently. "As a reward, how about I teach you a neater version of your favorite jutsu?" In the same month. Again, Sume ordered in a tone so strong that it would be impossible to argue with her. Hana had asked her mother to train her, so it's unlikely that she would. Hana clung to her lunch as she made herself spin quickly once more, but this time she did not turn into a human drill as she usually did. No, she turned into a death wheel this time, shredding her adversaries. The shredding part wasn't, but perhaps that was overstating things a little, because that was Hana's method of handling any challenge. She blew through any barriers her mother put in her path. Hana flung herself forward and started spinning quickly, her dog companions following closely behind. The last thing she wanted to do was intentionally destroy anything. She was proficient in the power aspect of jutsu, but she was now honing her control over it. In order to accomplish this, Hana was racing through a set of intricate cones, trying her hardest to avoid hitting any of them and to stick the tight corners. Although it was absurdly difficult, she was confident that the outcome would make the effort worthwhile. She would be able to better control her other techniques as well. Narrow spaces would no longer cripple her, she would no longer be disadvantaged. Even though Hana knocked down a few of the cones as she sped through them, she still received a passing grade. When she finally stopped, barely holding onto her lunch, she heard her mother applaud. Sume commented, "You did well," with a savage smile on her face. "You only knocked down 3 this time," she said. It was unusual for her because she typically only offered backhanded, sarcastic compliments. Hana smiled at her mother, saying, "It was nothing," with a confidence that made her smile. Since Hana had been among the first to master the Gatenga technique, she would permit the boasting for the time being. Normally, learning the fundamentals would take a few weeks, but Hana almost mastered it in that time. Her daughter was well on her way to becoming the next clan leader, and Sume was proud of her. In terms of clan hierarchy, the Inuzuka had a peculiar way of doing things. The symbolic crown was typically passed from mother to son or daughter. Any Inuzuka could become the head of the clan, unlike other clans. To defeat the Alpha, the current clan head, in combat was all that was needed. The title was then transferred to the Alpha's firstborn child if they passed away before someone could surpass them. For instance, Sume rose to the position of clan leader at the age of 15, and even now, 15 years later, no one has been able to overcome her. That was an additional distinction between the other clans and the Inuzuka. Neither the clan leader nor the clan heir had to be male. For this reason, despite having a younger brother who was a man, Hana was regarded as the clan heiress. Nor had Sume been mentioning those facts. Hana was on the verge of becoming strong enough to assume leadership of the clan. Perhaps she would establish the custom of a 15-year-old taking charge of the clan. At the idea, the elder Inuzuka grinned. Her only son whispered breathlessly, "Whoa," and she turned to see him peeking out of the door's corner. He was startled by Sume's growl and exclaimed, "Kiba, I told you to stay in the house." The boy stumbled and fell outside after trying to escape. With a little oomph, he landed and got to his feet, his head a tick mark. When Kiba was 6 years old, he insisted, "But Mom, it's no fair. Why does Hana get to learn all the cool jutsu?" Sume growled, but there was a hint of teasing in her voice. "Because she's older than you. And a ninja. And stop whining," she said. She loved giving the little boy hell, but she wasn't really angry. It was the simplest way for her to pass the time and entertain herself. Kiba retorted angrily, "I'm not whining, and I'm old enough to get my own nin-dog now and become a ninja. It was unfair." Her younger brother became enraged when Hana simply laughed at the scene. "What are you laughing at?" he roared, adding a second tick mark to the first. In response, Hana rubbed Kiba's head violently and laughed even harder. "Kiba might be right, Ma," she said, raising an eyebrow at her mother. "He might be just old enough to get a pup from the next litter," she added, and Kiba nodded his head in agreement, his eyes practically gleaming. Sume raised one eyebrow and lowered the other, and Hana had to explain why. "Well, my teammate Naruto isn't much older than Kiba," she said, giving a little sigh as she swallowed her pride. "And he's probably stronger than me," she said. To be honest, she had no idea if she would defeat Naruto. She would claim that things would go her way if she had complete control over her nin-dogs, but Naruto's capacity to create an infinite number of shadow clones negated that benefit. When it came to fighting, Hana wasn't sure if she would win because Naruto was quick, strong, intelligent, and a little bit brutal. Kiba's cries of bullshit were ignored as Sume's eyes widened at the admission. It was clear how much she valued the boy if she was prepared to acknowledge that, something that all Inuzuka detested to do. Sume asked, "And how does that help Kiba's case?" After a brief pause, Hana said, Because Kiba and Naruto are the same age. Naruto's pretty mature too, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that since Naruto's mature and Kiba sometimes act like him, he might be mature enough to handle it," slowly attempting to put her ideas into words. Sume considered her daughter's words as she glanced down at her youngest son, who was staring up at her with expectant eyes. When he used those puppy dog eyes of his, she sighed slightly. She was never going to be able to compete. She grinned slightly and said, Fine. If I think you're suitable to be one of their partners, I'll pair you up with one in the next litter," as Kiba started to jump up and down and shout with delight. In the same month, Levi swallowed water, momentarily losing the manners his mother had practically instilled in him. Sweat poured from every pore, and he was worn out. He had a terrible headache from dehydration, and his throat felt like sandpaper. Unconsciously, he pondered whether he had asked Naruto to introduce him to his taijutsu instructor. There was no doubt that the man was insane. The man was insane. There were no ifs or buts. It was absurd. All he did was punch things and yell about youth. He had made the error for a straightforward reason. He believed that Naruto's taijutsu teacher would be the most qualified person to assist him with his own taijutsu, since he was aware that he was a professional. Although it had been obvious during the mission months prior, Levi was aware of his deficiencies in the field. He might as well have just stood there and taken the hits when he was battling the white-haired one. He hadn't been strong enough or quick enough to defend himself, much less launch an attack. He had been ripped apart by the teenager. The only reason he hadn't been vanquished sooner was because the teenager was afraid of his hornets. He recoiled when he thought of his first kill, and then there was the red head. Levi had been entirely dependent on him. He was carved up like dinner by the redhead, and his only options were to run and dodge. Levi believed that by simply understanding the academy style, he could get by. In his clan, practicing taijutsu was not highly encouraged because it was not favored by any Aburame, who preferred to keep a safe distance. In order to feed a larger hive, his clan primarily concentrated on growing their hives and chakra reserves. He felt his clan was being a little silly after that mission, when long distance was not an option. A great shinobi trains his weaknesses, while a good one trains his strengths. And that's why Levi was hoping for the sweet release of death instead of enduring this hell right now. With a fist in the air, Guy exclaimed excitedly, "Yash Levi.kun. You mustn't give up now, we still have another hour of sparring to go." Naruto yelled, "Yeah Levi. We still have a whole, another hour," next to the man in the green outfit. His voice was as animated as the older man's. Levi was stunned. How could anyone find this amusing? Even though he was a hard worker, he had never in his life imagined that he would be performing such a physically taxing task. But Levi took a few deep breaths to calm himself and stop his heart from pounding. He couldn't make a fool of himself in front of Naruto. Naruto was one of the few people who ever showed interest in his clan, so that would be an insult to his pride. Everyone else shunned them because they were strange or repulsive. They were never particularly accepted in social settings, even though they weren't subjected to discrimination. Naruto was unique. The fact that he shared his body with insects didn't bother him at all. He was constantly inquiring about his clan and actually found it cool. He walked back over to resume the sparring session because of this. Because Naruto was just too cowardly to take on a challenge, Levi wouldn't allow his interest in his clan to fade. Guy gave the team the thumbs up as Levi assumed his new stance for what must have been the 1000th time that day. "Most youthful Levi.kun," was all he said before they started fighting again. Guy maintained his strength and speed in the mid-Chunin range. He didn't want to overwhelm the boy, but he wanted Levi to get used to fighting a stronger and faster opponent. Levi sidestepped to avoid a jab, then grabbed Guy's wrist with his other hand, put it on his elbow, and turned abruptly. Guy consented to the action and carried it out. Levi had Guy in an arm bar a moment later, with his hand poised at his elbow, poised to break it or dislocate his shoulder. Unable to move from his spot, Guy lay on the ground. Guy tapped out after a few seconds, and Levi let him go. His new style was centered on evading, countering, and grappling. After years of being a long-range fighter, Levi realized he couldn't suddenly switch to close quarters. But if anyone ever came near him, he could create a backup plan. It was a grappling and takedown focused style known as jujutsu. This style could even be used to combat an armed adversary. Levi retreated when Guy exclaimed, "Yash! You've made excellent progress these past few months Levi.kun. I think it's time for the next step." What comes next? What comes next? Was there a level more difficult than this one? Could that have happened? Naruto cheered as Guy said, "Now, let's see how you do against two opponents. Naruto.kun, let us fan our friends' flames of youth." Naruto exclaimed, "Yeah, let's do this Levi. I'm not gonna hold anything back," which gave Guy an idea. "I should hold back less as well. Doing so would only insult Levi.kun's abilities. Yash, I'll limit myself to low Jonin level and take off my weights. How does that sound?" Guy asked a frightened Levi. Unfortunately for the poor boy, Guy interpreted his silence as an affirmative because he was so terrified that he was unable to speak. Guy was stretching his now free legs after 2 minor earthquakes. He only said, "Get ready," before he and Naruto charged. The Chunin exams are in a month. Naruto, looking considerably worse for wear than he had in recent months, walked into his usual clearing and asked, "Itachi, what are you doing here?" When he arrived at the same time as usual in the early morning, he saw Itachi rather than his ni-san for his ninjutsu and kekkei genkei training. He was perplexed even though he was glad to see his friend. "Ah, Naruto.kun, you snuck up on me," Itachi remarked, putting down the book he was reading. To his surprise, even though the words were untrue, they were almost the truth. Because Naruto was now unconsciously suppressing his chakra signature constantly, Itachi was unable to sense it and Naruto had been silent as a ghost while walking. Itachi genuinely questioned what sort of training Enko was putting Naruto through to make the boy so skilled at stealth. Itachi realized he hadn't responded to Naruto's question as he closed his book, which was much thicker than a person his age should be reading. With a puff of smoke, the book disappeared. "As for why I am here, I will now be tutoring you in genjutsu," he said. Naruto gave him a perplexed look before Itachi started to elaborate. "Kakashi-senpai asked me to help you with the art because you are very vulnerable to it. You are still unable to use any genjutsu because of your less than adequate chakra control. Still being unable to perform the leaf exercise is a good example of this, he said, disregarding Naruto's curses regarding the blasted impossible exercise before going on. While being unable to use genjutsu is a weakness, you are also unable to break out of most genjutsu as well. This is a problem that must be fixed because the Chunin exams are only a month away and no one knows what type of shinobi will be participating, Itachi continued to explain. But you're the same age as Hana, Naruto said, acknowledging that he was not very good at genjutsu, but he was still perplexed as to why Itachi would be teaching him. You're a genin like me, he added for comparison. Itachi grinned a little at this. I'm actually a Chunin, he said, and Naruto's eyes widened. He considered shocking the boy by telling Naruto that he was Anbu, but he quickly brushed the idea aside. Naruto demanded, what? Since when? Because he believed Itachi to be a genin, he was absolutely certain. I understand your shock, but save your questions until after the lesson. I will answer them, but we cannot stray too far from the topic, Itachi said, laughing, before holding up a hand to stop Naruto's questions. I was promoted in the Chunin exams a few months before we had met, he said. With a nod, Naruto readied himself for the words of his new instructor. Genjutsu are techniques that are employed in the same fashion as ninjutsu, requiring chakra and hand seals. However, the primary difference between the two is that the effects of genjutsu are illusory. Instead of attacking the victim's body, like taijutsu or ninjutsu, genjutsu techniques manipulate the flow of chakra in the victim's brain, thus causing a disruption in their senses. There are several methods to accomplish this, but the most popular ones include implanting your chakra into the chakra network of another being, planting your chakra and making a physical object appear to be deceptive, or eradicating or producing false images or senses. Despite being one of the big three shinobi arts, genjutsu is a very underappreciated component. High intelligence and extremely precise chakra control are the two primary prerequisites for genjutsu. There are very few genjutsu masters or even experts because the majority of shinobi lack one or the other, if not the willingness to use the art. I will be teaching you more about how to implement a genjutsu at a later date, but for now we will be focusing on how to disrupt and break a genjutsu for practical reasons. He inhaled deeply in preparation for another lengthy speech. Changing the way your chakra flows or having a strong physical reaction are the two main ways to dispel a genjutsu. I'll go over each one in order. To use your chakra to dispel an illusion, stop its flow, then send it to the affected area, usually the head, to remove the genjutsu or expel it in a burst. The first approach is the simpler one. The bigger the chakra burst, the more powerful the genjutsu you can defeat. However, since it is impossible to determine how much chakra is needed to dispel an illusion, this technique may be rather wasteful for your chakra. You use this method to disrupt the few jutsu that you can break out of, he said, pausing for a moment to give Naruto a clinical look. Until you are able to elevate yourself above a B rank, we will continue to refine it. Considering your continued growth in your ungodly chakra reserves, the side effect shouldn't have a significant impact on you. Despite his confusion from all the information, Naruto was able to ask, what about the other method, to indicate that he was beginning to grasp what the older boy was saying. The other approach is most frequently linked to pain perception. Although this presents issues on its own, Itachi clarified that a severe pain or other bodily response will overcome the genjutsu and dispel it. After taking a moment to process the information, Naruto said slowly, all right, I think I understand. So, when do we start? Ha asked, and Itachi smiled back. When he said, why? We already have. You've been trapped in my genjutsu since the moment I closed my book. Naruto realized he still had a long way to go. Chunin exams are in 4 days. There were 25 genin teams, including themselves, so there were 75 genin here, plus the families and sensei of each genin. The gates to the village were packed, more crowded than Naruto had ever seen. There was a sizable group of people gathered around the genin, all of whom were wishing their kids luck. Naruto, who had been assigned to Team 13 after Akito was crippled and declared incapable of active duty, witnessed dozens of Inuzukas cheering Hana off and numerous Aburames silently waving Levi off. When Naruto looked around the crowd, he couldn't find anyone he knew. Where were Enko.ne and Kakashi.ni? Where were all of his friends and teachers? A tiny wave of disappointment and sadness rose in Naruto's chest. Had they forgotten? Had they not arrived? No, they had vowed to see him off, and they would not betray their word? Before a smoke bomb went off, Naruto scanned the crowd for someone. He tensed up, ready for battle with all the other genin teams, but as soon as the smoke cleared, he saw the faces he had been searching for. Enko.ne, Kakashi.ni, Guy, Sensei, Asuma, Sensei, Hayate. Sensei, Itachi, Sasuke, their mother and Itachi's friend, Ayame, Tucci, Kurenai, and even Akito were all present in the tiny hole that the smoke bomb had created. Anko was bouncing around with a big banner that read, "Go Naru Chan," and he was singing that if anyone could win the Chunin exams, it was Naru Chan. Kakashi.ni was holding the other end of the banner, but instead of jumping around like Anko, he gave Naruto a thumbs up and a double eye smile. Itachi and Sasuke were waving good-bye and wishing him luck, respectively, while Ayame was yelling that he could still win despite his small size and that her father was giving him free ramen for a month if he did. Akito, who was in a wheelchair and had a brown-haired girl behind him, was the last person he glanced at. He gave Naruto a thumbs up and a smirk before whispering something for Naruto to see. Kick ass and take names. Naruto gave his family a confident smile and a thumbs up just before they were given the all clear to leave. His smile was so big that it hurt his face and tears welled up in his eyes, which he wiped away with the back of his forearm. With their unwavering belief that Naruto would succeed and win the entire thing, Naruto's family continued to wish him luck and wave him off. Unbeknownst to them all, though, Naruto was taking part in the Chunin exam that would eventually be known as the Exam of the Red Sand. It was so brutal that out of the 123 teams that took it, of them, not even one third survived to see the third exam.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.